Sorry about that. Good evening, members, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Council at the Guildhall. Please be seated. I've been seated as well. Thank you. As usual, our meetings are being webcast so that residents and other members of the public have the chance to see them live or to view them on demand later if they wish. In the unlikely event of an emergency requiring us to evacuate the building, please make yourselves aware of the emergency exits and follow the instructions of the security staff who are present this evening. Before I begin this meeting, I invite you all to observe a minute's silence in memory of Honorary Alderman Brian Watson, former councillor, Lord Mayor and Sheriff, who sadly passed away in June this year, in tribute to his contribution to the city. Please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. May I now remind everyone, as usual, to continue to behave respectfully and appropriately at tonight's meeting. I would like us to have a good, productive debate, giving as many members as possible the opportunity to have their say. I would also like to remind members at this stage that the guillotine will fall 3 hours and 30 minutes after the start of the main meeting. I intend to have one break tonight during the meeting at an appropriate point for 15 minutes. Before we proceed with the formal business of the meeting, I'd like to welcome Councillor John Maroney to his first meeting. Councillor Maroney, as you know, was elected as the new member for the Hull Road ward and at the by-election held on the 4th of July. And I'm sure you will all join me in congratulating him on his election and wish him well in his new role. As there is no impact on political balance, members will be updated on committee appointments in due course. I would also like to offer warmest congratulations to Councillors Nelson and Taylor, both of whom have welcomed baby daughters in the last fortnight. Both councillors are now on parental leave, and I'm sure you will join me in wishing them well as they navigate the challenges of parenthood. In addition to Councillors Nelson and Taylor's parental leave, I have received apologies from Councillors Mason, Rowley, Smalley, Wardby and Widowson. Do members have any other apologies to report? Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Pavlovic as well, please.
Thank you. Can I remind members and officers to please turn your mobile phones to silent and to mute other electronic equipment for the duration of the council meetings? Thank you. Before we move on to the business of the meeting, can I remind everyone of our agreement at the July 2023 meeting of full council that we passed a motion requiring the Lord Mayor to remind us all about our net zero targets. With that in mind, you will be aware that York's target for net zero is 2030. We need to continue to adapt and thrive despite extreme weather and encourage new skills and jobs to ensure a just transition. With only 1,993 days to the 31st of December 2029, the challenge is immense. We must and shall continue to work together to address the climate emergency. As usual, please speak clearly during debate and use your microphones. Can you also please remember to switch off your microphone after speaking? Please indicate that you wish to speak by raising your hand. I will then call upon you to speak at the appropriate time. To help us get through the business effectively tonight, I'd be grateful if we could keep the meeting focused and to the point. I will keep us on track if I feel that we are losing focus. Item 1. May I ask all members who have a personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest in any of the business to be discussed at tonight's meeting to declare your interest now if you have not already done so in advance on the register of interests. That looks like a no. Do I have members' approval to sign the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 21st of March 2024 and annual council held on the 23rd of May 2024? Thank you. I want to just update you on what I've been doing. It's been a whirlwind of engagement since annual council, and the Civic Party have had the pleasure of meeting people from all over York who make a difference to the life of the city and the lives of our residents. We shared the joy and vibrancy of York's Africa Day celebration, York Pride, the Our City Festival, and several local fairs, galas and carnivals, showcasing all that York is renowned for and that we can all take pride in. York is truly inclusive and it's a diverse, welcoming city. I was especially humbled to meet 3 D-Day veterans and also the families of those that served in Normandy and in Kohima 80 years ago, whom we all owe so much to. We welcome people from Dijon, Munster and Flanders, and were reminded of our shared history, culture and our twinning. We saw the election of a new government, and whatever our politics, I am sure, for the sake of those we represent, we all hope they will work to bring about a united and bright future for our city and our country. Finally, I am sure that you all share the grief I feel as we especially remember this evening the life, humour and service that was Brian Watson. I should also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the leader with York's Imam and Rabbi in developing a cross-community council resolution on the situation in Gaza. This work is ongoing and the leader hopes it will be concluded before our next full council meeting. We now come to the public participation session. We have 5 registered speakers tonight. Before we proceed with our speakers, I would like to remind all our public speakers of the rules relating to public participation set out in our Constitution. Council Procedure Rule 14.7. In exercising his or her public participation rights, a member of the public is entitled to express views positive or negative about the performance of the council, but must not say anything which is defamatory or discriminatory, make any personal attack on an officer, disclose confidential or exempt information, including personal information. I now call upon our first speaker, Jonathan Beatson, who would like to speak specifically on the crisis in Gaza. Pardon? Oh. I'm sorry about that. We're still waiting for Mr. Beatson. So I'm going to call on the next speaker, Gwen Swinburne, who would like to speak on governance items within the remit. Thank you. Ms. Swinburne, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Welcome. I refer to a forward plan item from the Director of Governance to have what appears a one-time change to the long-established mayoralty points system. As I understand, this appears a political expediency for Labour, who won't stand a candidate but won't surrender their points, and Conservatives who didn't stand a candidate a few years ago but want their points back.
Excuse me, Ms. Swinburne, can you just hold 1 minute? Councillor Douglas.
Sorry to interrupt, Gwen, but we do have people in here who use the hearing loop and they can't hear you unless your voice is hitting the microphone. So if you could sit and speak into the microphone, then that would be helpful for everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start again. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I refer to a forward plan item from the Director of Governance to have what appears a one-time change to a long-established mayoralty points system. As I understand, this appears a political expediency for Labour, who won't stand a candidate but won't surrender their points, and Conservatives who didn't stand a candidate a few years ago but want their points back. This will ensure Conservative Councillor Rowley gets his dream out-of-turn mayoralty next year, and Labour gets theirs in the crucial pre-election year. With a majority of only one, it is clear why. It appears rather a convenient quid pro quo, but it gets worse. Why has the latest top governance team agreed to do this? The system has worked so well for this council under the careful direction of previous senior staff, who have scrupulously circumvented all possibilities of political interference until now. And now, how do you draw the line? Can others now claim points back and assert points advantage in any council term they want to be Lord Mayor? Or is this deal only for friends of those in power? The points system has never been codified in the Constitution because no one has ever thought to politically abuse the process, and no previous officer would have even considered it. If it was ever necessary to review the points system, the established practice should have been codified, alternatives weighed up, then considered first by the cross-party Constitution Task and Finish Group, then to A&G, then to full council. Any such decision should not be via politically controlled executive who as political beneficiaries of this fudge may expect to have to declare an interest. Lord Mayor, I have repeatedly raised the need for the mayoralty matters to be in the hands of a formal committee to avoid such political interference. But even I didn't think both the administration and statutory officers would even consider such overt politicisation. I should have known better with the various flag shenanigans. Anyone who understands will be asking, what can Councillor Rowley and the Conservatives offer Labour to secure this privilege? And why didn't they insist on a proper democratic and considered process? Lord Mayor, members, please ensure this proposal is put through proper democratic processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swinburne. Your comments have been noted. I now call upon our next speaker, Flick Williams, who would like to speak on Disability Pride Month. Ms. Williams, you have up to 3 minutes.
Lord Mayor, July, Disability Pride Month, so entirely fitting that your first time chairing council falls in this month. This administration has reversed the ban created new blue badge spaces nearby without time restriction, making this venue accessible once more. And we finally have 2 new accessible toilets in Silver Street. But unfortunately, that is where the good news ends. Despite the social model of disability becoming adopted policy in October 22, we still do not see disability equality training rolled out across the authority, which is the foundation of embedding the social model in decision-making and practice. We are told a supplementary planning document for accessible York cannot happen as other SPDs take priority. There has been no inclusive design training for relevant officers. Perhaps we might learn from Bristol City Council, who, having been found guilty of institutional disability discrimination, are addressing their failures head on. Their head of HR was quoted as saying, I am embarrassed and ashamed to say it has taken me nearly a quarter of a century to appreciate what the social model actually means in reality on the ground. I shudder to think of the work and the advice I've given to managers over the years, not realising I'm simply reinforcing the medical model of disability. What refreshing honesty. Now, here, in the absence of any DET or inclusive design training, we have scheme after active travel scheme rolled out that discriminates against disabled pedestrians and bus users, such as Foss Islands and the Station Gateway. Meaningful consultation with disabled people is still not happening. Instead, we have repetitious, wheel reinventing, time and money wasting exercises that are inferior to work already completed, such as the Martin Higgett Associates report. On some iterations of the city centre access plan, you will find a line to purchase a disability pride flag following a council motion. My inquiries reveal that 2 years later, one has not been bought, let alone flown. Now, I know with absolute certainty that flying the disability pride flag from the Mansion House makes no appreciable difference to my disabled life one way or the other. But by failing to carry out adopted policy, especially in sharp contrast to the enthusiastic backing given to Pride in June, all this
Ms.
does
Williams,
is
you have
confirm to
30
disabled people yet
seconds.
again that we are the firm bottom of the equalities hierarchy, because our inclusion and accessibility are more complex than flag flying and almost always fall into the too difficult, too expensive, can't afford it category. Disappointing then that watching the pipeline do the rounds of the scrutiny committees, opportunities to include this on our wish list were missed. So this Disability Pride Month, as during every other month, my
Ms. Williams,
question is,
can I
where
ask
is
you
the
to
overarching
conclude,
plan to
please?
embed genuine disability equality into this council's work plan? How long do we still have to wait to go beyond 1 step forward and 3 steps back,
I'm sorry,
beyond tokenism?
Thank-
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Your comments have been noted. I now call on our next speaker, Jeff Beacon, who would like to speak on agenda item 6, specifically plans for York. Mr. Beacon, you have up to 3 minutes.
I hope that's the item on climate change. The issue of climate change is tightly bound with planning policy, which has made certain groups wealthier, and consequently, they are likely to have increased their carbon emissions. Emissions rise with wealth. This is one reason why parts of York have personal emissions several times those of other parts. Many more people want to live in York, causing the price of houses to rise, a boon to existing house owners. The losers are renters, mostly young people who cannot now afford their own homes, but must pay higher rents. Many more houses should be built. Today's King's Speech may help and make it possible to change the flawed local plan, which plans far too few houses and promotes climate-destroying lifestyles. The council should be asking for the area of Greater York to be made a development corporation with powers of compulsory purchase. Giving planning permission for a house increases a plot's of land's value from less than £1,000 to about £200,000. This bonus accrues to the landowner. Although landowners should be compensated, the bulk of planning gains should be public property. The majority of new building outlined in the local plan is likely to be disastrous from the climate because York specifies 2 car parking spaces for most households. The House of Commons committee has said, in the long term, widespread personal vehicle ownership does not seem compatible with significant decarbonisation. 2 car households are a disaster for the climate. This is confirmed by a paper from Joseph Rounty Foundation on the distribution of carbon emissions. Apart from a pleasanter lifestyle with local services that car ownership forces out, new car-free houses are likely to be much cheaper because there will be much less competition from more affluent people with cars. All new housing should be car-free, making living much cheaper, pleasanter, without locking in climate-destroying lifestyles. To those who say car-free development is unrealistic, I say then life as we know it is unrealistic. I know York is a small proportion of the world, but we could show the world it is possible to have lifestyles that have 0 carbon emissions, stop climate change, and stop climate change being the road to death, to echo a comment by Pope Francis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beacon. Your comments have been noted and will be taken into account when that item is dealt with. I think that concludes the public participation section for this evening. Notice has been received of 2 petitions to be presented this evening. The council procedure rules allow 1 minute to present a petition to the council. I now invite Councillor Waller to present the first petition in relation to an estate manager for the Chapelfields estate.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to present the petition from Westfield Ward, worded, we request that the City of York Council take immediate steps to recruit a permanent estate manager for the Chapelfields estate so that there is a visible presence from the council's housing department, which has been absent for too long in our community. I would add that this is in support of those estate managers from surrounding areas who have been asked to cover cases in the Chapelfields estate and to help them in turn do their work in their substantive patches. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I now invite Councillor Whitcroft to present the second petition in relation to the proposal to locate a new McDonald's restaurant off Fulford Road.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and welcome to your first full council meeting in your new role. I'm pleased to present this petition signed by 1,825 people, including residents of Bishopgate, Fulford and the City of York, in opposition to the proposed building of a new McDonald's on Fulford Road. This demonstrates a key concern of local people already expressed by campaign groups, the heads of local schools and other stakeholders who have worked tirelessly against this development. Reasons for opposition range from discomfort of the proliferation of unhealthy food outlets, associated litter, antisocial behaviour and transport problems. These are all the things that we should stand against as councillors. As a small but mighty community in Bishopgate against the global fast food giant, even the metaphor of David and Goliath feels like an understatement. Despite the challenges, I'm presenting this petition to allow my residents' voices to be heard and to let them know that Councillor Wilson and I will always stand with them. I would like the concerns raised in this petition to be noted by the relevant council body when the decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you. In accordance with the council procedure rules, the first petition will be referred to the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee, and the second petition to the Planning Committee B. Thank you. I now invite the leader, Councillor Douglas, to present her written report, which you will find at agenda item 6 of the council agenda. Standing orders allow 5 minutes for the presentation of the leader's report and 5 minutes for any response by other group leaders.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As already acknowledged, the unexpected passing of Honorary Alderman Brian Watson in June was a shock to all. I was honoured to attend his funeral to celebrate his life and unerring service to York, and I was glad to see representation of colleagues from across the chamber, and I pass my personal and continued best wishes to Marcia and the rest of his family. Brian was a highly respected member of the York civic community and will be sadly missed. We have births to celebrate. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Emily Nelson and her husband on the arrival of their daughter, and Councillor Callum Taylor and his wife on the arrival of their daughter. I'm sure we will all have the joy of meeting them over the coming months. I also have the honour of welcoming the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of York, Councillor Margaret Wells, to her first meeting as Chair of Full Council. She and the rest of the Civic Party have already had a busy start to their civic year. Our paths have crossed many times already, from grassroots community events to the celebration of heritage and high culture. I'd also like to welcome and congratulate Councillor John Maroney, the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, David Scaife, and the MPs for York Central and York Outer, Rachel Maskell and Luke Charters, into their roles both as newly elected and returning politicians. The election results in May and July create a strong political team across our region, aligned with national government and ideally placed to take advantage of the opportunities this brings us to improve the lives of citizens across York and North Yorkshire. I'd like to thank the hundreds of council staff for managing to successfully run 2 major elections in 2 months. This has not been easy given the calling of the snapper general election and the hugely increased administration associated with voting. There have been many, many long hours and sleepless nights, but we can now move into a period of stability and public service and get on and deliver for the people of York, as we all know they quite rightly expect and demand. The future is exciting, with our significant role in the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority. Mayor Scaife has already visited number 10 Downing Street for talks with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and has met with Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves MP. He has highlighted the unique characteristics of our urban, rural and coastal combined authority and the investment opportunities this presents. I'd like to thank members across the chamber for their input into the York pipeline of projects that went through my decision-making session this morning and will now over time be presented to the Mayor and Combined Authority for consideration. It's been a welcome relief to be back into business as normal and get on with the announcements of consultations and projects that are delivering for the citizens of York. From public consultation on the council's development proposals of 141 new truly affordable passive house homes on Ordnance Lane in Fishergate and Willow House in the Warmgate area. Innovative proposals for rapidly increasing the quality and number of affordable homes across the council's property assets, to consideration of York's local transport strategy at tomorrow's executive. The celebration of 6 months of delivery of the free school meal pilot in Westfield and Burton Green primary schools, moving forward with creating the jobs of the future with Green Construction Skills Village, moving into phase 2 of delivery on Acomb Front Street, and the start of the largest public budget consultation the council has ever carried out, delivering on the projects that matter and listening to the ongoing and developing aspirations of the citizens of York. And finally, an update on the Poverty Truth Commission that has been a highly important part of the last year for me. In April, the Commission entered phase 3 with the holding of a Next Steps and Celebration event. The community commissioners, those living or that have lived in poverty, chose the issue to be treated with kindness, understanding, honesty and respect when accessing services, as the one that would make the most difference to them whilst experiencing poverty.
30 seconds.
The outcome of discussions between the community and civic commissioners was a charter for organisational standards, together promoting dignity and respect for those facing poverty. The council is a signatory to that charter and we're getting on with implementing that across our systems. So I really do encourage you to go to the Poverty Truth Commission website, have a look at what they're doing and also have a look at the organisational standards. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. If any of the other group leaders wishes to respond to the leader's report, please indicate now. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I join the leader in welcoming you to your new position as Chair of the Council and, more importantly, to the role of Lord Mayor. I'm sure you'll enjoy the latter considerably more than the former. I also join the leader in marking the sad loss of Honorary Alderman Brian Watson. I remember Brian as an excellent ward councillor and specifically as Lord Mayor and Sheriff, roles in which he excelled. But I will probably most remember him as a public speaker at nearly all meetings that I attended to raise questions about the community stadium and his beloved Knights. I will personally miss our extensive chats both during and after meetings. We may never have got the parking solution he wanted, but he played a huge part in getting the successful transition for York Knights to the stadium. While back in April, we knew we would have one election, I don't think any of us envisaged three, and I too express my thanks to staff, both within electoral services and across the council, who worked so hard to make those happen. I also take the opportunity to welcome Rachel back as York Central MP and welcome Luke, David and John to their new respective roles. The report does mention the huge working majority in Westminster. It does not mention the slim majority by which her own administration was saved. It's telling that with a national landslide, the one area where Labour's vote went down was here at York Council. We continue to remind this administration that its glowing assessment of itself is not always replicated across the city, and they would do well to reflect on what the people of Hull Road told them at the ballot box. Who knows what would have happened had it not been for the last-minute emergency requirement to trial green bin rollout? I only hope the 66,000 letters needlessly printed were recycled and the carbon footprint of that decision is not too damaging for our net zero ambitions. The leader is correct to point out that the result of the election provided an unprecedented opportunity for York. We have heard from this administration a great deal about how decisions are not their fault, but the fault of a previous one, or of national government, sometimes even past governments. These elections draw a line, and now it is time to deliver. In 2023, Labour literature stated boldly, anyone can make promises, but only Labour will deliver. Now there are no excuses and no caveats. We wait to see the delivery of neighbourhood caretakers, universal free school meals, council tax freezers, and 100% affordable homes on all council land. We note the planned events for Yorkshire Day that, in the leader's words, will celebrate Yorkshire in all its fine regalia. This is a welcome acknowledgement of the importance of the civic role, and hopefully this about-face will lead to a review of the much maligned new civic protocols. We welcome the update on the local plan. Hopefully this latest final consultation will prove to be the last and it is adopted this autumn. It's been far too long in its creation. In my time alone, it has morphed from RSS to LDF to local plan, and very little strategically has changed through those. Residents will, however, be concerned by the statement from the leader that she is already seeking to review the plan before it has even been adopted. I note the new government's intention to reinstate housing targets and confirm York never abandoned ours. When the previous government did, and when we were challenged by the inspector for over-delivering in York, we defended our plan. We have always believed in delivering the homes we need and will continue to do so. This has been achieved while still protecting the special character of our city. Last year, the Executive Member for Housing committed to no greenbelt development outside of strategic sites. This promise has not been maintained to date, with the government with Labour backing allowing development of a greenbelt site on New Lane in Huntington. So I would ask the leader and executive to reaffirm this commitment and give certainty to residents that the greenbelt boundaries will be protected. Finally, we welcome the budget consultation. As we see on this agenda, the challenges faced financially by York and other local authorities is an existential threat. It's worrying that we approach Q3 and have still not seen a budget monitoring report. Adult social care overspent by over £6 million last year, a figure twice as high as the previous year. If this continues, all council services suffer. Rapid action is essential, as is delivery of savings. The failure to correctly procure the advertising contract, failure to communicate properly with key service delivery partners, the abandoning of capital projects and botched restructures all place £1 million of the pressures on existing budgets. Despite 12 months of claims to the contrary, the council expects these record levels of one-off reserves to balance the budget this year. As the leader says, this is an unprecedented opportunity for York, but immediate action is required. That's why our motion calls for such urgency. Without a swift review of funding to those worse off, the cuts will reach to the bone and beyond. On this and many other important issues, the Liberal Democrat group is keen to work together on a cross-party basis where that is in the city's best interest. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Councillor Stewart, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and welcome to your formal role for your second meeting, I guess, your first full meeting. Well, it's certainly been a bit of change in the last few weeks. Some of it good to see, some of it not so good. I welcome Councillor Taylor and Councillor Nelson's babies, and I welcome the new baby of the chamber, Councillor Moroney. Congratulations on your result. Not obviously the result I'd have liked in Hull Road, but we can't win them all, or many of them, unfortunately. And I'd also like to just say what a great shame it is that Honourable Alderman Brian Watson is no longer with us. His gown is having a well-deserved night of peace and quiet, because he's certainly been a voice for all of his residents, for the Knights over the years, and done an incredible job. And I'll just quickly say that the first words that Brian Watson said to me when I first saw him, which was when I was a young, keen, enthusiastic councillor in 2011 in my previous guise, and there was some banter in the chamber, probably my first council meeting. Somebody said something to me and I said, I'll take it on the chin. And Brian said, which one? But I've forgiven him, moved on, and everything like that. He was a great voice. I mean, obviously, we've had the general election. Wasn't everything I'd hoped for, unfortunately. Obviously, there was that move change amongst people. It was great. Some of the sites we saw Labour councillors in York Outer, incredible sight. And we saw some brave York Labour councillors outside the Ring Road. Rucksacks, maps, compasses, nosebleeds and all, but they were there, and it was great to see. Great to welcome them to my ward. In terms of the leader's report, I mean, Councillor Eyre's not really referenced the report itself, and I don't blame him. There isn't much of what's actually going on with the council that makes it into the report. It is just very much events that have been gone to, and lots of stuff not there. Welcome to new executive members, or the new executive. I lose track of how many executive members have changed. And I suppose that from a group point of view, I would say, although I welcome them to their roles, I do find the whole shared executive member increasingly strange. I thought we were doing the shared executive member before to the job share to emphasise just how important climate change was. Now I think there is a real issue, I think, in terms of two people job sharing an executive member role rather than that being split, as just a point. In terms of the stuff in the report, the blue badge work is welcome. Very much appreciate that. Welcome the opportunity to discuss and feed into the transport strategy, and hopefully we can see that develop. And it'll be fascinating to see what does happen with the local plan, which hopefully we can finally get over the line rather than it being amended by the government. So very much look forward to seeing that. But as has been said, it's now a lot of time ahead. We've got 3 years until the next local elections. We've got 4 years until the next Conservative government. We've got 3.5, 4 years until the Conservative Mayor of North Yorkshire and York takes over. And so there's a great window of time to do things. And we certainly will remain constructive wherever we can, happy to work together. I suppose the one question that I do have is that we've had 14 years of the council's not had enough money, and the council's been denied by central government, and central government should give the council more money. And now we have a government that is a Labour government, and we have a Labour council that has their ear, or can certainly speak to them. And so the one question I would have to the leader, which I hope she can give me an accurate answer, maybe to the nearest 100,000, is how much extra money would she like to see York Council get from the government in the next funding settlement? And if she can't give it to the nearest 100,000, the nearest million, which should be quite easy to do. So we can just sort out and just really clarify for York residents that they weren't empty words that we've heard for 14 years, but it was a true commitment, and that the Labour government will deliver on that. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Douglas, do you wish to say anything in reply?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I have to say, I really value Councillor Eyre pointing out that Labour has won so many elections recently, including in Hull Road, and as Councillor Stewart said, outside the Ring Road as well. I mean, goodness gracious, whoever would have thought that we would see York and North Yorkshire close to red from top to bottom and side to side? It's not far off now, is it? And don't worry, we will be out there outside the ring road, continuing our march on into other parts of the city. And I suppose I don't like to give other people hints on how to win elections, because I think we've kind of got that going quite well at the moment. But remember, you have to win. You don't have to smash it every time. And we are winning, and I'm really pleased about that. So I think that's good news. And yeah, we are getting on and we are delivering for the people of York. I think that my report and the speech that I gave gives really firm examples of what we're doing. And given that we've been in office for 12 months now, 14 months, I am really, really proud of what me, my executive, my backbench members, some of the opposition as well that have worked constructively with us are delivering for the people of York. And I have to say that there has been a marked change from the just do nothing approach from the previous administration into the approach of getting on, doing it and not being ashamed or scared to do it. Yorkshire Day, I'm really looking forward to that. So that is on the 1st of August. We will have about 120 people coming from civic parties from across Yorkshire to join us in York. So it would be great to see some of you come along and see the procession. I think it's going to be an absolutely fantastic day. And I know that the Lord Mayor and the York Civic team will be there with her as well. So I wouldn't miss it. And people have been absolutely desperate to come to York. Never changes, does it? So I'm really happy about that as well. And then the local plan. We are going to get on and deliver the housing. I mean, we cannot wait to get that into place. We have a lot of housing land allocated already. The developers are ready to get going. They're absolutely chomping at the bit. So we're just waiting for that final approval to come through now. And yes, we will be reviewing it in the early stages, because that data that was presented to us that's in the local plan is from 2018. That is 6 years ago. I mean, goodness gracious, this city has changed in that period of time. And if we weren't looking at reviewing it, I think that would be an abdication of our responsibility. It will be an ongoing process. York does take a while, a very long time to get a local plan through. And so to think that we wouldn't be reviewing is just a fallacy. And also, I'd like to remind the leader of the opposition that planning is not a political decision-making body. I cannot count the number of times that you have inferred that there have been political decisions made on planning committee, which brings planning committees into disrepute because it is illegal. We do not do that. You may do it, but we do not do that. Budget, yeah, it's going to be very difficult. There is no getting away from it. Cost pressures, demand from the demographics of our city, particularly in adult social care and children's services, is always on the increase. And I don't ever see that stopping, to be honest. It is a problem for us, and it is right that we ask the people of York what their priorities are for the budget. I wouldn't want to not bring them into the conversation. I think we all need to be into that conversation. And yes, actually, Councillor Stewart, I have just written to Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner about some of these issues. And I've laid out the fact that York needs a fair funding review and our budgets just aren't stretching as far as we need them to. I can't give you a number now as to what I expect to come into York. I think they've been very clear about budgets, that it will take a while for them to understand the full desperate impact of 14 years of Conservative government on the NHS, on education, and where those priorities need to be laid to put that right first. We are in the queue. I'm asking for the money. We need it, but we've also got to be realistic about what can be achieved. And that is the message coming very strongly out of a Labour government. So thank you all for your constructive comments, and I hope I've given you something to go away and think about.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. I now invite members to question the leader on her report. The council procedure rules allow 10 minutes for questions and comments. The leader may respond directly to any question asked or comment made, or may agree to submit a written answer if unable to respond in detail, which will be circulated to all council members within 5 working days. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can the leader provide a progress update on York Central since the last council meeting in March, including possible changes to housing plans for the site, please?
Thank you, Councillor Burton. And yeah, I was on York Central yesterday, actually, with the developers, with Homes England. Peter Denton, Chief Executive, came up to visit us, and David Scaife, the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, was there with me. And I have to say, since November, when the developers were selected and we've been starting conversations and discussions with them, we have had very positive feedback from them about responding to our vision and our hopes for that site, and the fact that it absolutely needs to deliver for the people of York. Up until that point, I think the people of York thought there is no way that York Central is going to move forward, and is it actually going to give us the affordable homes that we need, the good quality jobs, the green space, the biodiversity, the sustainable homes. I don't think that they had confidence in that at all. But the developers have already started to engage with the local communities. The conversations that I've had with executive members, other partners in the city, they are all truly consistent around wanting to push up that above policy, affordable, truly affordable housing on that site. And Homes England are very supportive as well. So I'm really hopeful for the future of what the site looks like. I think it will exceed our expectations, our Labour group expectations that we had when it came into being and got that outline planning approval. So yeah, I'm really optimistic. Thank you.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Your report mentions that the council is currently developing a local youth strategy, and you say that you recognise the value of good local youth provision. But you don't mention the fact that your administration's ill thought out changes to ward funding arrangements directly led to the loss of much valued youth provisions such as the Strensall Youth Club. Would you like to apologise to the young people who have been affected by your decision and explain how you will reinstate what has been needlessly lost?
I cannot even begin to think why it is that changes to the ward funding have affected a youth group, other than perhaps the decisions of the councillors and where they choose to award their money, because youth groups totally fit within our each principles. We are supporting, as many councillors are in the chamber here, youth activities in their wards through their ward funding. So it's not something that I really recognise. But what I do recognise is that the council is really starting to up its involvement in youth activity across the city. The Mayor of York and North Yorkshire is very committed to that as well. So part of our pipeline of projects has youth activities, youth hubs in there, cultural passports. So actually the city, given the position that youth work has been in here for a number of years, are pretty optimistic about an increase in provision. So I'm sorry, Councillor Healy, I really don't recognise what you're talking about.
Is that supplementary, Councillor Fisher?
Thank you. I'm surprised you don't recognise the problem we suffer in Strensall as far as youth provision is concerned. The youth club costs £12,000 a year to run. Our youth funding, our ward funding has been reduced to 9,300. So that's why we're not able to do it. Could you suggest how we can make that money stretch further, please?
I suppose what I would say, Councillor, Fisher, is that essentially, you know, youth ward funding is an aspect of funding going into communities, and unfortunately it cannot stretch to paying for everything for everybody. And there are decisions that we all are making, all of us, all 47 councillors, about how they best use their ward funding. And I know there are examples across the chamber that elements of a service can be funded through ward funding, but not necessarily all of it. And many services across the city have had to look at bringing in funding from other places, from grants, funds. I mean, we are working ceaselessly with our community organisations to help them do that. So no, it would of course be fantastic to be able to fund everything 100%. Of course it would, but unfortunately, council finances don't stretch to that. And we all know it. We've said it 100 times about why that is, how we're trying to balance the demands of every important service across the city. And yeah, I hear the challenge, but I'm sorry, but we're all dealing with it.
Supplementary, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Crawshay.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Douglas, I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on, because we know from Micklegate Ward, one of the issues with funding youth services from ward budgets is that it's year on year and people can't recruit staff long term, leading to gaps in provision. I believe the youth strategy that you're bringing forward is designed to give longer term certainty around funding for some of those youth services and to think about a more strategic approach across the city rather than just piecemeal offer for young people. Yeah, absolutely. I think it wouldn't be long, would it, for us to think back into the past when there were youth services that were, as you describe, had some sustainability behind them, could be relied upon in areas of our city right across the board. And we really need to move back to something that is more akin to that, but in a way that we can afford. And that means that we need to work in partnership across the city, which is what the youth strategy is all about, looking at that strengths-based, asset-based approach to youth work. And there is some fantastic work going on in the city that I think we should all recognise and celebrate. And yeah, it is a shame that it's tough times, but we are getting on. We're doing what we can. And I think the youth strategy and that partnership work is a real way of moving forward with it. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It was just to really come back on my question and just in the spirit of cross-party working so that we can get some clarity on the council's finances, because regular viewers of council meetings will be aware that a few months ago, Councillor Kilbane said we were just over £40 million short as a city. So I said to the nearest 100,000 or the nearest million, how much extra funding does the council leader think we should be getting from government? Can I ask now to the nearest 5 million, how much extra funding she believes the council should get from the government?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. The actual budget, the medium-term financial strategy outlines that over the next 3 years, we need to make savings of 30 million in order to stand still. We have got to do that, and it would be really lovely if I had an envelope arrive on the desk, wouldn't it? Here you are, Claire, here's 30 million. I may get some of that money. We may get some of that money. I've asked for it. I've also asked for the fair funding review to be reignited. That, you know, has been cross-party interest in that. It's really important. But I cannot commit to you at this point in time what the government is going to give to us. I'm sure by the autumn that we will hear more. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed for us all. But as I said earlier, we are in the queue with the health service, which I understand has a black hole deficit of huge proportions that we can't even imagine. Education, policing, roads need fixing. I could go on, couldn't I? And let's face it, we didn't get the money from the previous government. I hope it will be different. I think it will be, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it for too long at this point in time.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, I'm not asking Councillor Douglas to comment on behalf of the government. She's not hit such heights as that yet. But from a council point of view, how much does she think the government should give to us? How much does she think she would like to see the government give to us in the next financial settlement? So Councillor Kilbane said that figure was just over £40 million a few months ago. I think what residents want to know is, what does she as council leader think we as a city need now from whoever is in power? Because we were able to give those figures when it was a Conservative government or a Conservative and Lib Dem government. So the question is, and I'll take it now to the nearest £10 million, How much extra funding would she like to see the government give City of York in the next financial settlement?
Councillor Stewart, I think it would be irresponsible of me to put a figure on that and say to folks that, you know, we're going to expect that income from the government. As I've said, national finance is in such a poor state due to the fact that your party left it like that and crashed the economy, that we cannot give those numbers at this point in time. But I hope to be able to come back to you in the autumn, once the autumn statement comes out, and tell you what we are being given, but I'm not going to put a number on it now. It's impossible.
Is that a supplementary? Okay.
Thank you. I think it's a slightly unusual question to ask around how much we need financially, because for me, the real issue is that we're left to deal with all the problems in the country. And I actually think the real power that we have in government right now is not in how much money we can receive from them, but we've already talked about youth services. We know that the vast majority of our money is now spent on social care, which wasn't the case a long time ago. So my question is actually, what are your other hopes beyond the amount of financial settlement we get, but what else do you think the government can do for us, or you hope to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we go and have a look at the Labour manifesto, we will see that there are an awful lot of commitments around issues and programmes that the council has started already that we will benefit from, because we're in a great position with them, to be honest, and that will help our budget as well. So breakfast clubs, free school breakfasts, childcare, we are ready to go with that, and we've already spoken to Bridget Phillipson about it. Other aspects are the youth work that we're carrying out, the family hubs that have been so successful that Martin Kelly and his team have put in. I think we can really benefit from that. The fact that our local plan is coming through at the kind of timing that it is, and the fact that we've got York Central online as well, the ability to deliver housing on that scale for the people of York, we can really benefit from the fact that Labour wants to put so much into house building, and we're prime position for that. Our transport strategy is coming through. I know that many of my executive members here are
going to have to wind up here, Councillor Douglas. Interesting.
We're interested in bus franchising, and also really keen to see the renationalisation of the trains over time. So I think, yeah, there's great opportunity. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, members, that concludes the questions. We are overrunning. I'm now going to move on to item 7, the report of the Deputy Leader, and I invite Councillor Kilbane to formally move his written report as set out in the council papers at agenda item 7.
Formally move, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. I now invite members to question the Deputy Leader on his report. The council procedure rules allow 10 minutes for questions and comments to the Deputy Leader. The Deputy Leader may respond directly to any question asked or comment made, or may agree to submit a written answer if unable to respond to the detail, which will be circulated to all council members within 5 working days. Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And firstly, congratulations to the Deputy Leader on your election as Deputy Mayor for the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority. Your report claims the administration is steering York away from what you describe as the old insular politics of the previous administration. Can you please explain how this characterisation fits with the successes delivered by the previous administration in securing funding for major projects such as York Central, the station frontage, the Outer Ring Road dualling, which are now coming to fruition?
Certainly, Councillor Fenton, and thank you for your question. I think, given the track record of the previous administration, that funding was secured almost in spite of the previous administration. With work, well, I mean, you can shake your head all you want, Councillor Eyre, but you know it's only the sort of generosity of WICA, a Labour-led administration, that is funding the York Central development that was referred to. And to
To give you an example, before the election, when we were in opposition, both myself and Councillor Douglas met with the landowners of York Central, met with the people that were in charge of bringing that project forward. And in the first week post-election, we went and met with Homes England, with Network Rail, and a couple of the other partners who were there, where we were informed that we were the first political leaders they'd had a face-to-face conversation with, a project that affects the future of everybody in this city and region. And there had been no political engagement with the people who were running that project. And you left officers of this council second-guessing what the leader of the council's opinion might be on particular developments. So, of course, but you can shake your head all you want, Councillor Ray, but that's what happened when we went in to see them. So we sat down with them and said, look, what we want is 40% truly affordable housing on that land. What we want are jobs on that land so that people who live up on Severus Hill, when they look down that hill, they see opportunity in York Central for them and for their kids. We told them that we wanted it car light because of the climate concerns that we've got, but also in terms of the space that we need there. And while they might not have agreed with everything that we said, they were bloody glad to hear a political leader telling them what it was that this city wanted, because it had been so badly lacking through the insular politics of the previous administration.
That's supplementary, Councillor.
It is, it's very well written. Isn't it the case that while elsewhere in your report you claim to dislike a nasty brand of politics, your response demonstrates that this is in fact the way you like to do business?
What that refers to, Councillor, is the lies that were told in the leaflets that the Liberal Democrats put out in the Hull Road by-election. Absolutely disgraceful, straightforward lies put in leaflets, as well as, of course, all the usual half-twisting of truths and ridiculous bar charts. Now, if you are putting lies through people's doors, then that has an impact. In this arena. Sorry, Chair.
I just hold you there. Sorry, Councillor, but
At the start of the meeting, Lord Mayor, you made it clear that nobody would be allowed to make defamatory statements. The Deputy Leader is accusing people in this chamber of lying.
That's correct.
That is not true, and that is defamatory. Should not be allowed.
It is true, so it's not defamatory. You know, it's what you do. You are a poison in the body politics of York, as far as my understanding of it is.
Councillor Kilbane, Councillor Kilbane, Councillor, can I just remind you that what I also said was, can you be respectful to each other? And I would ask you both to do that, please.
Certainly, Lord Mayor, and apologies if it was disrespectful. I was just trying to tell it how it is.
I think we'll move on. Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This should be much easier to answer. When can we expect the process to be completed and a report brought to full council so that we can meet the Deputy Leader's long-term aspiration to get rid of this report?
Thank you, Councillor Healy. And actually, the previous questions are quite easy to answer too. My understanding is that this will come to A&G at the end of July meeting. Is that right? I'm looking for people. Yeah, end of July, I think. I mean, obviously, you're going to miss all this enjoyment once it's gone. But yeah, this report should be deleted end of July or thereafter.
It looks like there's no further questions. So thank you, members, and that concludes the questions. We now move to agenda item 8 to consider the 4 motions on notice submitted under Standing Order B13. These are included in the list of notices of motions and amendments contained in the agenda supplement. The first motion relates to public spending, and I invite Councillor Ben Burton to move that motion.
Great. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm proposing this motion because it's crucial we address the critical funding challenges we face as a city. A matter so important that we're doing it twice this evening. So that shows how critical it really is. For over a decade, public services have been facing real term cuts. This is particularly stark for local authorities who overall spending power reduced by a quarter in the decade after 2010. There's a cost to not funding public services. The New Economic Foundation estimates that for every £1 cut from public services, it costs almost 4 times as much in long-term costs. Investing in public services is the price of a function in place. Not repairing roads means injuries and damage. Not investing in dentists means poor health and more costly emergency treatments. Council cuts can mean that families that should have received early help intervention fall into crisis that they may never recover from. For people at the sharp end, the cost of not funding public services is immeasurable. York has the lowest core spending power per head of any authority. The paltry settlement that we receive impacts our service provision and necessitates higher council tax. The formula which dictates this funding is woefully out of date, drawing on measures including 1990 property values, 2001 census data, and even the number of days with snow laying on the ground between 1978 and 1990. The outcome of this is a formula with no clear correlation between an area's demographic needs, wages, or deprivation, and how much money it actually receives. To sum up the absurdity, Kensington and Chelsea were the best funded authority per head in 2021, and London boroughs on the whole fare much better than Midlands and Northern counterparts. Fixing this formula would actually be a genuine solution to levelling up the country, unlike the things that we normally do. The new government have inherited a horrible financial situation and of course need to operate within their means. However, we're in a crisis situation and it's important that we, the council, speak up to ensure that the issues outlined in the motion are given the urgent attention they require, whether that is a fairer spending formula, multi-year settlements, or tackling the ongoing dental crisis. I hope you join me in supporting these recommendations today. Thanks.
Thank you. May I have a seconder?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'm very happy to second the motion and thank Councillor Burton for bringing it forward. The chronic underfunding of local authorities is something that has been affecting City of York Council since the change of government in 2010. Back then, the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government started the programme of austerity, which has devastated all public services since then. And we as councillors and residents have seen the impact of that. And this motion is about how, at a time of change, we respond to that legacy of austerity. Councillor Stewart talks about putting a number on what we should be asking from the new government. I'm not sure how you put a price on the devastating impact that the cuts to public services have had on people across the city. Maybe a visit to A&E would start that process. But whatever the next financial settlement brings, it's really important that we understand the scale of the challenge that we face as a city. And I particularly welcome this motion's recognition of the impact of austerity on council staff and partners who have endured so many years of budget pressures, but still come to work every day to serve the residents of this city to the best of their abilities. Thank you to all of those who serve our residents directly as council staff or indirectly as voluntary sector providers. We really appreciate your service. We know that we can't expect to end the injustices of the last 14 years overnight. But the vote for change was won less than a fortnight ago, and there is a new government in which Labour councillors and supporters have worked incredibly hard to secure and will now work even harder to secure the benefits of that government for our residents. Now is the time for collaboration, working together with colleagues in the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority and with national government to look at how we as local councillors maximise the opportunities that devolved investment can provide to local residents. This motion sets out a really clear and constructive commitment to work with the new government, and I'm really pleased to hear that Councillor Douglas is already working hard to secure that for York. Advocating for the fair funding York has been denied for so many years. She's already writing to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, working with the Mayor, pressing to ensure that we get our share of that Labour manifesto promise on NHS dentists, NHS investment, hospital appointments, and all the other injustices that people across this city have been living with for 14 years. Thank you.
Well timed. I now invite debate on this motion. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's both encouraging and disappointing, of course, to be talking about how far local authority funding is in crisis. The reality of the matter is that we don't have enough funding to fund the essential services that our residents both need and deserve. I think it's helpful to look at some of the reasons for the added pressures on council budgets. Obviously, funding not having kept pace over the last 14 years is important, but here in York, we've also seen demographic change, people living longer, we've got an ageing population in the city. Also, the impact of COVID on health and well-being across all age groups and all demographic groups. That has left us a legacy that we are still trying to address. More services are required by our residents and their needs are more complex. And of course, the cost to provide for those needs is higher due to periods of extremely high inflation during the previous government. And let's be clear, inflation still exists. Prices are still going up. They're not going up quite as rapidly as they were, but they are still going up. And that means we still have cost pressures to add to the demand pressures that we're facing. And all of this, combined with the previous government's lack of care and attention for local government funding, has left us needing to cut our budgets by £14 million in the current year and £10 million per year for the next 3 years. And that is just to stand still. This can only be done by cutting services. All of the previous savings we have had to make have trimmed all budgets massively. And I know that the Leader of the Opposition will recognise this because it was him in that position in the previous administration in the council. As I think Councillor Eyre mentioned earlier, residents in York are losing out on about £40 million a year that we would have had if our funding had kept pace during the period of Conservative austerity. Those cuts can't be reversed overnight. Council funding is very complex and it's not as simple as saying we need another 40 million, 30 million, 20 million, 10 million, whatever, because council funding doesn't work like that, which the leader of the Conservative group knows very well.
30 seconds.
In recent years, we've managed to mitigate our overspends and added cost pressures with one-off funding, including selling assets and using additional government funding given for COVID response and recovery. But those are one-off funds. They no longer exist, and so difficult decisions need to be made. We are not afraid to say to any government run by any political party that council funding needs to change. And we made that case during the previous government. We'll make that case during the current government. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Runciman.
Before you start my 3 minutes, Lord Mayor, I want to say I have missed every pearl of wisdom that Councillor Burton has said. I'm really sorry, I didn't hear one. However, I did hear Councillor Coles, and I do hope that somebody in the administration will find a way that I can hear everything, and other councillors in this chamber who have the same problem as I do, perhaps not quite as bad, who are excluded from such a lot of things in such a lot of rooms in West offices, because I have to say, it makes me very fed up. Now you can start my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Just.
I can't hear you.
I'm just going to say thank you very much, Councillor Runciman, for raising that. I will talk to officers about it.
That's much appreciated, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much. Right. We're glad to see that the motion makes mention of the health issues that are acute in York. Access to an NHS dentist is becoming harder and harder for so many families. In the year up to June 23, the percentage of children that had seen a dentist in the last 12 months was only 60%, down from 75% in 2018. Children who need dental treatment often find eating and speaking very difficult, and this hampers their development, particularly their social development. This crisis brings us to a breaking point. Finding an NHS dentist has become harder than ever, and getting an appointment is almost impossible. The only alternative is to pay. Many practices have already shut their doors to NHS patients altogether, but the previous government was missing when action was needed. The present dentistry contract does not give practices enough funding to do the work that is needed. As the cost of living catastrophe continues to hit households hard, private dentistry is not a feasible alternative for the many people who are living with constant pain. It's a national scandal that people in our community are desperately turning to very dangerous do-it-yourself dentistry. Some of the stories are really quite frightening. Our dentistry and our public health services have been run into the ground by the previous government. The Liberal Democrats are urging the new government to end the crisis in the NHS, especially dentistry and in social care. Our Lib Dem manifesto committed to an extra 8.35 billion to fix our broken health and care system, and we hope that the new government will listen to our calls for action in both the NHS and social care crisis. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Sorry. The Liberal Democrat Group is happy to support this motion as it is very similar to the motion that we will be proposing later in the agenda. The motion has some good points in the motion, but less so in others. Firstly, both the Liberal Democrat and Labour manifestos in the general election called for a long-term financial settlement for local government. As the motion says, it is essential for the long-term financial planning of the council to be able to know exactly how much income from central government we will have so we can budget accordingly. This last year, the final funding settlement from the government came after the executive had made their decision around what would have to be cut that year. This meant that the extra 1.5 million the government gave the City of York Council could be put away in a rainy day fund rather than being used to stop the Labour Council's deeply unpopular green bin charge. So it says tax here, but no, charge is much more acceptable. And the cuts in libraries. However, this motion does lack the strength behind it of our later motion. The F20 group is only mentioned in passing as if it is a separate organisation that is working on a campaign for fair funding. This is not the case. York needs to be active in leading the campaign like the previous administration was. We need to bring together those underfunded councils and show some leadership. The resolution also makes no reference to increased funding for York. It weakly asks for a review into fair funding to be completed. We need to be very clear with this new government that a floor of 90% of the average, which would mean an extra £78 per head of more funding in York, is what we expect from that review. The aim of this motion is exactly what the Liberal Democrat Group have been fighting for within the administration and out. We would encourage the executive to use whatever links they now have with the new government to push these aims. Thank you.
Thank you. No, Councillor Stewart, sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you, Laura. I only just put my hand up, so don't worry, it's fine. We'll be voting for this motion with rather less excitement and enthusiasm than probably other councillors in this chamber. I mean, I like Councillor Burton. I like both Councillor Burtons, in fact, but and I don't doubt the sincerity of this motion and the well-meaningness of it. However, it does remind me of the one highlight of the last administration for me, which obviously I was no part of it, and it was watching Councillor de Gorn, then Councillor de Gorn, Executive Member for Transport, on Twitter, going around the city, photographing transport-related things and saying, there's an issue here, somebody should do something about it, and getting a whole load of replies saying, this is literally your job. Why aren't you doing something about it? Here we're going one step further, though, because we refuse to debate any of the things that we can actually influence. We're having nothing to do with them. We are just engaging in this utterly pointless letter writing saga. The sum total of tonight's 4 motions, and this is the best of the four, is 8 letters that we're going to write. And in the Lib Dem motion later on, it says call on the new government to commit to a funding floor. Well, that could conceivably be done by a letter as well. So 9 letters will be our contribution. We'll have changed nothing, absolutely nothing, unless we genuinely have a conviction in our writing skills, in the absolute genius of our officers to nail a point so brilliantly and pertinently that the government will write back and say, yes, York, we will do this. It's absolutely pointless. If you look at the 4 points that council resolves, it is literally writing to the Secretary of State for levelling up, which obviously the wise amongst us will know doesn't even exist as a position anymore. Writing to, so we're writing 2 letters. I'm going to work collaboratively with other parts of the public sector. Or was there any risk that we would be not working collaboratively? And then finally, we're putting on record our thanks to staff and partners. Absolutely fine, no problem with doing that. But can't we do that just in a normal way that we give thanks rather than it being through a full motion, written, everything like that? We have achieved absolutely nothing when we vote for this. And to see the debate between Labour and Lib Dems about our deal's fairer than yours, and oh no, well, we worked harder on this, and you've not got enough fairness in it. I'm not allowed, Councillor Healy says, to remind people he used to be a Conservative. Otherwise, it could be quite embarrassing, me reminding of people where he sat from 2010 to 2019, where the government was that he was such a keen supporter of. So I won't be mentioning that. But we have achieved nothing by these 4 motions. It's a total and utter waste of time. And when I go back to Copmanthorpe and people say, what have you achieved tonight, as they stop me in the street, I'll say we've achieved absolutely nothing. We're writing 8 letters. It's a total farce. So with a lukewarm support, we will support it.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Burton, do you wish to reply?
I'd love to. Yeah, and sorry you weren't able to hear what was being said. So closer. Yeah, firstly, apologies that you couldn't hear what was being said. Yeah, just quickly summarise. I mean, I think we're aware that letter writing is not our greatest power, but I think it's important that we speak to residents and we make sure that they're aware that this is on the top list of our priorities. And also we do that to the government as well, because there is a whole range of priorities that they have right now. But we need to make sure this doesn't get missed off, because local authorities can often be forgotten. And, you know, 8 letters is an outcome for the evening. I'm sure there's lots of times they ask you what you've done this evening, and it's not 8 letters, it's nothing. So it's a little bonus in the bag. I'd just like to take this last second to sum up. I think I wanted to reflect on something Councillor Coles said, and which is the final recommendation in this really, which is the kind of reflection to thank staff for the work that they do during this, because having previously been a member of staff at the council, it's you can overlook how hard it is working in local authority during a time of cuts when you're being asked to do more with less resources, and it's brutally difficult and almost wiped me out. So I think it's important that residents at home and people who are in this room understand how much time they put in and all the hard work they do. So I just want to finish on that note.
Thank you. I will now take a vote on the motion. If you wish to vote for the motion, please raise your hands now. Thank you. That appears to be unanimous, so the motion's passed. I now invite Councillor Emily Knight to present the second motion, which relates to giving York children the best start in life.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to propose this motion to full council to show York's support for scrapping the 2-child benefits cap and tackling the very serious issue of child poverty in York.
Currently in York, there are 2,737 children living in absolute poverty. 3,372 children living in relative poverty. That is a stain on the previous 9 years of the Conservatives government, exacerbated by this cruel two-child benefits cap policy. This policy was introduced in 2015, and George Osborne said that it was about making those on benefits make the same decision as those in work. Well, the Resolution Foundation found that 6 out of 10 families affected by the two-child cap were already in work. Barnardo's chief executive, Lynn Perry, called the limit one of the biggest policy drivers of child poverty. The worst aspect of this is that the government introduced an exception for children conceived non-consensually. Think about that. Essentially forcing victims of sexual assault to choose between reliving their trauma or face extreme financial consequences. This is simply a reprehensible policy that has plunged many families into deeper poverty. In government, Liberal Democrats blocked this policy. In opposition, whilst Labour abstained on the introduction of the two-child benefits cap, Liberal Democrats voted against it. At this most recent general election, Liberal Democrats included a commitment to scrap the cap in our manifesto. No such commitment was forthcoming from the Labour Party. Residents will make their minds up about which party is committed to ending child poverty, and they will be watching this debate closely. York Labour has 2 choices in this debate. Put your heads above the parapet, go against your national party, the manifesto your 2 Labour MPs were elected on, and stand up for the most cost-effective way to lift 250,000 children out of poverty altogether and helping a further 850,000 children. Or you can follow your national party's plan and continue to allow many families with more than 2 children to languish in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm grateful for the opportunity to second this motion to highlight the case of families who are missing out on support because of the national policy for a 2-child limit on benefit. The reversal of this cap, which is supported by such a wide range of organisations in the field of social reform, would help the 1.6 million children in a household affected by the policy, according to the Department of Work and Pensions, and these organisations include the Joseph Rowntree Foundation locally. For the latest figures released on the 11th of July by DWP and HRMC, for York, the number of households not receiving a child element or amount for at least 1 child, covering universal credit and child tax credits, amount to 450 households in York Central and 210 households in York Outer, so a total of 660 households, which includes over 2,000 children in this city. Behind the statistics are very real stories of families struggling to get by on a day-to-day basis. And in a ward like Westfield, I speak to many families in that position as it is a pressing issue. But I appreciate that it affects all parts of the city. So I hope there will be widespread support across the council. Part of me hoped that the King's speech today would have made this motion unnecessary, but it was not to be. When you have a majority the size of the Liberals in 1906, I would recommend that you read Edward VII's speech as a King's speech in 1906 as to the breadth of change that was coming to that country at that time. It's important that there is a sense of transformation that is achievable with that size of majority. I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you. I now invite debate on the motion.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak in support of this motion to remove the two-child benefit cap. This cap disproportionately affects women, ethnic minority families and single-parent families and children. Abolishing it would lift 250,000 children out of poverty and reduce poverty for 850,000 children. The Women's Budget Group estimates that if 250,000 children are lifted out of poverty, then long-term this would save society 2.3 billion, approaching twice the 1.3 billion saved by implementing the child benefit cap. Reducing health inequalities is at the forefront of Labour's manifesto, which aims to halve the gap in life expectancy between the richest and the poorest in England. Removing the two-child benefit cap could go some way to supporting this. Over 1,000 women have had to use the rape clause in which a child is born because of non-consensual conception. This is to apply for money that they are entitled to and need to support their families. No one should ever have to disclose or prove that they were in an abusive relationship or were assaulted in order to get money they need to feed their families. People should not have to experience further trauma of disclosing assaults. A child should not be condemned to poverty due to the circumstances of their birth. Beyond these families living in poverty and experiencing the benefit cap, are families experiencing unbearable pressure daily, experiencing crises to try and get by on a lot less than they need. I have personally worked with families who feel shame and embarrassment at needing to go to food banks to feed their families. Whilst this is absolutely not something that they should feel shame about, it'd be wonderful if we could return to a time where people did not need to access food banks. The removal of the two-child benefit cap is something that most people would wish to see happen, whilst being aware that this government needs to act in a financially responsible way. As we're aware, the first 2 years of a child's life are fundamental in predicting long-term health outcomes. Removing the two-child benefit cap could be a step towards addressing health inequalities and allowing all children in York to have the very best start. Whilst the decision to scrap the benefit cap hasn't yet been taken, we on these benches will push the government to make these decisions as soon as possible. This will be done with the full support of our York Central MP, Rachel Maskell, who we're already working with and who has a petition running around scrapping this two-child benefit cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Culwick.
Thank you. I'm pleased to contribute to this debate about a policy that has caused immense hardship and suffering to families across York and throughout the country, the two-child benefits cap. It's imperative we recognise the damage this has inflicted upon some of our most vulnerable residents, and that the new government should take swift action to rectify this injustice. So first, let us consider the impact this cap has on low-income families by limiting the amount of financial support available for each additional child. This two-child benefits cap perpetuates cycles of poverty and deepens inequality within our society. It forces parents to make unimaginable choices when providing for their children's basic needs. It is simply unacceptable in a compassionate and progressive society. Furthermore, the two-child benefits cap inevitably disproportionately affects larger families and minority communities. Families with 3 or more children are unfairly penalised, and it only serves to widen the gap between those who have. Moreover, let's not forget the impact of this cap on the well-being of children themselves. Restricting access to vital financial support, we are denying these children the opportunity to thrive and succeed, making it more difficult for them to lift themselves out of poverty and deprivation later in life, simply because of the circumstances of their birth. A gross violation of their rights and a betrayal of our moral duty to protect and nurture the most vulnerable. It is time for a change. It's time for the new UK government to scrap the two-child benefits cap once and for all, We must stand up for justice, equality, opportunity, and compassion. And we must ensure that every child, regardless of their family size or background, has the opportunity to lead a life of dignity and fulfillment. I urge all council members to listen to the voices of poverty campaigners, to act with courage, and to add our collective voice to the calls for this new government to scrap the two-child benefits cap. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Knight. I know I can't see you. I think you're 2 columns away, but they've put me on the extreme left again. There you go. Excellent to see the Lib Dems looking at motions that truly affect and support vulnerable people. This Labour group has consistently brought motions to combat poverty, and I'm glad that you've pushed the rest forward, Councillor Knight. Children in York are triply hit by poverty, I feel. I mean, as we've seen in both the Labour motion that's just passed and the Lib Dem motion yet to come, funding to services that has been damaged has really hurt those in poverty. We live in a very unequal city. So we see young people who see people who have a lot more than them. And of course, poverty itself is the problem. Recently, Andy Burnham, Labour Mayor of Manchester, he's not Lancashire yet, called for an end to the 2-child limit. But it would be remiss not to mention the state of the UK's finances, following 14 years of austerity introduced by the Liberal Democrats Conservative coalition government. And you will accept, I hope, that the Labour government has to think sensibly and securely about government finances, something that I think we've seen from the Labour campaign over the last few weeks, whilst the Liberal Democrats were sadly bungee jumping and paddleboarding. Andy Burnham was right to say scrap it, and I sincerely hope it forms part of policy and is kept under review by this new government. What I would say is this, I agree that this is one way to tackle poverty, but it is not the only way. In the King's speech today, we have seen commitments by the new Labour government to housing, surely one of the most important ways we can tackle poverty. Taking control of energy prices through new renewable energy, better buses, banning zero-hour contracts, race equality for equal pay claims, and of course, breakfast clubs in schools. So yes, of course, we support this. But here in the Labour Party, we're not playing politics with this. We're making differences to people's lives every day. So thank you for the motion. Let's get it passed.
Thank you. I will now take a vote on the motion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Knight. Would you like to reply?
Just to say thank you to members for considering this very important motion, and for I sort of welcome the positive contributions. Thank you.
Now I will take a vote on the motion. If you wish to vote for the motion, please raise your hands now. That was unanimous. Well, it was sort of unanimous.
Sorry.
If you just wait a minute while we just count. Thank you. All those against the motion? I can count that. And now any abstentions? Right. The result is 38 for and 2 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried. Thank you. I think now would be an ideal opportunity to take a break. So if we take a 15-minute break now, and I'll be back here. Thank you, members. Before we start the second part of our meeting, can I just remind members that to use the microphone, and when you're talking, talk directly to the microphone and don't be turning your head to acknowledge other people, because it does disrupt the sound. Thank you. I now invite Councillor Anna Baxter to move the third motion on ending disenfranchisement in elections. Sorry.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to start by thanking all the hardworking council staff and those recruited for the election for working tirelessly in ensuring that these elections are possible. It is nearly 100 years since the Equal Franchise Act, which gave men and women equal voting rights and was introduced, yet turnout in this general election was the lowest since it was introduced in 1928. Earlier this year, the cross-party Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee warned that as many as 8 million people could be disenfranchised due to a system that is neither efficient nor effective. During the general election, there were significant delays with postal votes arriving, with some not arriving until after the deadline to post them back, or even after the election itself. This should concern us all, especially given many of those who signed up for postal votes did so due to lack of voter ID or being away on polling day. Similarly, these new rules have disproportionately created barriers for those from minority ethnic communities who are more than twice as unlikely to have voter ID. It is encouraging that the new government has committed to reviewing the inconsistencies in acceptable voter ID that can be used at polling stations, which currently deems an older person's bus pass acceptable, but not a young person's. In constituencies with a large share of the population as younger, turnout was lower. We must seek to address this trend rather than place more barriers. While solutions to problems experienced during the election were provided, these did not acknowledge original reasons for applying for a postal vote, such as mobility or being away. This, coupled with tightened restrictions on emergency proxy votes and the way postal votes are handled, meant many were left disenfranchised. These issues may well have played a part in the turnout being so low. With the number of postal votes being requested at each election steadily increasing, it is paramount that the system can cope with increased demand. Postal votes currently make up 1/5 of the electorate, so it is important that they are not frozen out of the democratic process. The quick succession of the general election after the local elections may have been a contributing factor, but we must ensure that voting functions are proper. I hope that Council will support me in calling for a review of postal and emergency proxy vote rules and in hoping to end disenfranchisement in elections. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have a seconder?
Seconded and reserve the right.
Thank you. Notice has been received of an amendment to the motion as set out in the supplementary papers. I now invite Councillor Andrew Hollier to move the amendment as set out in the supplementary agenda.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Baxter for bringing this motion. Whilst ensuring the integrity of postal voting and ending the requirements to present voter ID are just two ways that voters are disenfranchised when voting, they're particularly relevant at the moment. I hope that the new Labour government takes up votes for under 16, a fairer voting system and other measures that would make a further difference, but I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. I've no particular issues with the sections relating to postal votes. Recent election, we all heard directly from residents denied their right to vote in July, and we of course had major issues at the last set of local elections as well. And these repeated issues with postal votes risk residents simply giving up and losing out entirely. In terms of voter ID, we simply felt that a motion called Ending Disenfranchisement in Elections should state unambiguously that the disenfranchisement should end and voter ID should be scrapped. As we know, voter ID was introduced by the last government to make it more difficult for people that don't vote Conservative to vote. Ex-MP Jacob Rees-Mogg said as much himself when he referred to the scheme as attempted gerrymandering. As noted, the Lib Dems submitted a motion in 2022 that outlined that the council believed the introduction of the voter ID laws would result in the undermining of the democratic process and will create barriers to exercising the right to vote, disproportionately affecting ethnic minority, low income, homeless and LGBT+, elderly, disabled and young people. All the evidence from the last two sets of local elections and the last general election is that exactly happened.
A recent poll by More in Common found that 400,000 people were prevented from voting in the general election because they did not have a valid form of ID. So we don't need a government review to determine whether or not this policy has disenfranchised voters. We know that it has already. That is why councillors should vote for our amendment and send a very clear signal to the new Labour government that York remains opposed to the voter ID laws. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have a seconder? Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Second and reserve the right.
Thank you. I now invite debate on the amendment. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I would like to speak in support of Councillor Hollier's amendment. I do have a lot of sympathy with Councillor Hollier, as he points out. National voter turnout in the national elections was down 7.4%. Now, I think that's something that should give us all cause for concern. It was worse in York Outer, the seat that Councillor Hollier contested on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, where voter turnout was actually down 8.3%. And my sympathy goes out to him because the Liberal Democrat share of the vote in that election was down 7.9%, which is kind of in between the two. But congratulations once again to the Lib Dems for bucking the national trend of actually decreasing the voter share, while nationally the Liberal Democrat Party's voter share went up. The local Liberal Democrats are very good at bucking national trends with their local party. I think they were the only political party of the Liberal Democrats that lost control of a council in the last elections. And I think actually the York Liberal Democrats were the only ones who lost seats to Labour councillors in the last election. So I have, as I say, a lot of sympathy with Councillor Hollier and his motion. I think had those 8.3% turned up to vote and been able to vote, had not been disenfranchised or voted or not voted for another reason, you know, had those 8.3% all voted Liberal Democrat and not shared it proportionately, had they all voted Liberal Democrat, then Councillor Hollier could have scraped into third place, some way behind Julian Sturdy and with less than half of the votes of the successful Labour candidate. And if you look at the combined vote across the whole of York, which, as Councillor Hollier says in his motion, was 10.35% down, if we apply the same logic, so obviously there was 3,000 votes that the Liberal Democrats picked up in York Central, add them to the 5,000 that Councillor Hollier picked up when he came in fourth place in York Outer. If you add those together and then add on the 10.35%, so let's say all of those people voted for the Liberal Democrats, then that would be a healthy 16,000 votes across the whole city, which is a third of the entire Labour vote across the city. So I'm sure it's something that Councillor Hollier could use in one of his bar charts, because he's going to be struggling to find anything to use in the future with their fifth and fourth places in the local elections, respectively. So, as I say, I have a lot of sympathy for Councillor Hollier. I can understand entirely where he's coming from with this amendment, given the performance of the Liberal Democrats in the local and national elections, and we will be happy to support this amendment.
Councillor Vassey.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I may be in a minority of one. I'm going to abstain on this issue, and I'll tell you why. My view is, if the current ID card system doesn't work, learn from others and make it better. Councillor Kilbane has just strutted the stage and turned it into a party political issue. His comments are interesting, given that he talked earlier about insularity among politicians. This issue shows how widespread this insularity is. I will attempt to give an internationalist take on this. I have never understood the British dislike of ID cards. ID cards exist in all European countries except Denmark and the UK. In the UK, there is a widespread insinuation that they are in some way undemocratic. Are we seriously pretending the UK is more democratic than Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Germany, France, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and all the others. In the French elections that have just taken place with ID cards, the turnout was 59.7%. In the UK, it was 52%. Does that really tell us about whether ID cards enfranchise or disenfranchise people? ID cards bring many other benefits. During the referendum campaign, the public were told incorrectly that the EU was responsible for health tourism, strain on the NHS, for people immigrating to the UK for work or access to benefits. In truth, the EU had nothing to do with any of that. The lack of ID cards was and remains behind these challenges, in my personal view. We have no effective way of deciding who can access employment benefits or apply for work or access free healthcare or have the right to vote. ID cards, in my view, are not fundamentally undemocratic, quite the reverse. The only critical thing is that every citizen should have access to a free, reliable ID card system so that everyone is enfranchised and no one is excluded. That's why I personally will be abstaining.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I mean, I entirely agree with the points made by Councillor Vassy on the broad substance of ID cards. I do have to say, I mean, some observers could have potentially said that Councillor Kilbane strayed from debating the amendments. I mean, I wouldn't throw that allegation, but some people watching could potentially claim that. And fantastic how it is to always hear about Lib Dems losing votes. It's probably not something I can particularly hear about at the moment, given the unfortunate election results just a couple of weeks ago. There's two issues here, fundamentally in this motion. And actually, I should say, Councillor Kilbane mocked Councillor Hollier and the Lib Dems, but fundamentally, the Lib Dems have led on this one. Labour have a motion about a wishy-washy request the government conducts a review of the requirements to present ID to vote, blah-de-blah-de-blah, and all sorts of hypotheticals. The Lib Dems have said, request the government scraps the voter ID requirement. So the Lib Dems have absolutely led on this, and they've turned Labour's wishy-washy into a tangible policy that should be advocated. As a group, we don't support that. You know, we don't support getting rid of voter ID because Councillor Vassy has said there is no bad thing in it. And I think we've got to face two serious issues that, you know, with voter ID, it may not be perfect for everybody. Obviously, is it easier to not have an ID than to have an ID? Well, clearly it is by definition. But we've all seen in the voter ID debate, Labour Party such and such meeting to discuss how voter ID is bad. Do not forget to bring your Labour Party membership card. You know, you have these things, you have ID things for also, I'm not saying it here in York, I'm saying it's definitely happened. It was on Twitter, so it must be true. You know, So we have that, this utter hypocrisy. And on the actual issue of postal vote, you know, I'm not really sure whether the motion is going for it does say more robust system, or fundamentally is it trying to make it easier? You know, the numbers of people postal voting now are absolutely sky high. And that system, I would say, is not working and should be looked at. I helped in a campaign a few years ago, in 2019 election, not York, not near York, but across both parties, there was no doubt that people would go to houses to speak to the key person when the house's postal votes would have arrived, and that key person will be filling out the postal votes. And that was an absolute fact that was happening, that they will be filling out the votes for 5 or 6 people. And that is not good for democracy. So we'll be voting against the amendment because fundamentally we do believe that voter ID is a good thing.
30 seconds.
But then we'll be abstaining on the main motion, because obviously this is one of the letters that I am invited to be joining as part of the writing. So we get some which is the council leader and the Lib Dem leader, and some which are the officers. This is what I'm party of. So that I don't prejudice those conversations about what goes in that letter, and so we can all work together on the content, we'll be abstaining on the main motion.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to just start by, it's very short, 3 points. One, I disagree with Councillor Stewart, because I'll be honest, I didn't understand a lot he was on about, but I disagree with that one. Two, it would seem the Liberal Democrats have fallen apart here. 5 didn't turn up and 1's breaking his party line. So that's the second point. And the third point is, just for completion and clarity, in Selby, we had first place Keir Mather, where the Labour Party won, and one Christian Vassie came 5th with 1,792 votes and 3.6% of the vote share. Thank you very much.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll also be brief. I just wanted to acknowledge really that we're obviously the amendment is about the voter ID. I do have some sympathy with some of what Councillor Vassie said around the what's really happening and is it the voter ID that is the fundamental problem. I think it is the case that voter ID has been used to suppress people's voting intention. And that is the clear thrust of the entire motion, actually, is around trying to ensure that every person's vote does count. It's not acceptable that somebody can't vote because they've got the wrong form of ID, just as it's not acceptable for somebody to not be able to vote because their postal ballot didn't arrive in time. Just as it's not acceptable, actually, for people to come into West offices and have a go at the staff because the postal ballot hasn't turned up in time, because I know that that happened. And I think in this situation, it's more of a problem of the system than it is a problem of an individual. And I can understand people's real frustration at wanting to vote. But you know, we have to be careful about where we direct our anger. I think we probably will end up with a little bit more discussion about postal voting in general when we get to the main substantive motion. So can I suggest we now move to the vote?
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, do you wish to reply?
I'll be brief, but I'd just like to say that it's all well and good talking about European laws and all that jazz, but in York, the reality is that it's communities like mine in Town Hall that were shut out of voting, and it was really heartbreaking, actually, the amount of people that couldn't go and exercise their democratic right to vote. And it shouldn't be up to members of the public and canvassers that have to go around and explain all these laws to people, because they're the people that are always on the sharp end of the cuts that governments bring and all the effects of those. So I think it's really important that we are debating this, and I'm really disappointed that the Conservatives aren't supporting us on that.
Thank you. I will now take a vote on the amendment. If you wish to vote for the amendment, please raise your hands now. Thank you. If you wish to vote against the amendment, please raise your hands now. Thank you. Any abstentions? Thank you. That the result is 36 for, 2 against and 1 abstention. The amendment is therefore carried. We will now move 36, 2 and 1.
Councillor Waters is low. We had 40 at the start, we're now down to 39.
Thank you. We will now move to debate the substantive motion as amended. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Rose.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to move my microphone in Chris's direction to address so that everyone can still hear me when I look at him. As well as the motion itself, I'd like to particularly support the welcome amendment to our motion. Our motion asks for due process and evidence, but I agree we already have it. This recent poll was an upsetting read, showing many who were turned away went home and came back and were turned away a second time. It proved that many people had the wrong type of ID or mismatched names, and 12% were turned away because they had valid ID but were told their picture didn't match. There are real problems with voter ID. Big Issue yesterday called voter ID racist and reported that people of colour were 2.5 times more likely to be turned away than white voters. They argue that 2 convictions for voter fraud doesn't outweigh institutional racist disenfranchisement, and it's an awful use of hundreds of millions of pounds. They agree with this motion in calling for the government to scrap voter ID, as well as asking for things like automatic voter registration. A year ago, former MP Jacob Rees-Mogg made a similar claim about older voters. I quote, "Parties that try and gerrymander end up finding their clever scheme comes back to bite them, as dare I say we found by insisting on voter ID for elections." Not just a confession that we were right in December 2022 to question their motivations, but evidence of its impact on equalities. Only one voted against our motion 2 Christmases ago because we all knew then we'd experienced the problems we have now witnessed. As already said, this was the lowest turnout general election since all adults could vote. And it wasn't just about ID. The sudden call by the former Prime Minister for an election without even his own party knowing it was coming meant that many people ran out of time to register to vote, to get new ID, to postal vote, to proxy vote. We've already mentioned the postal issues from our decimated postal system. We have a political system where most constituencies only have 2 viable candidates. And we have other problems with our democracy that included our student population being disproportionately impacted and the accessibility issues we outlined in our motion in March. Thankfully, today's King's Speech set out some plans to address a number of our democracy's problems. I hope the government goes further, and I hope it leads to improved turnout in the future. But some of it was not the system itself, rather a lack of faith in politics after the actions of the last 14 years of Tory and Lib Dem government, and seeing lies and hostility in political content and discourse instead of collaboration and honesty. Nationally, the Conservatives and Labour and Lib Dems all had fewer votes than 2019. Many unable to participate due to ID changes, but also many voters less enthused than before. But despite the university summer and the 10% turnout drop in the city and the other issues we have mentioned, the Labour Party in York gained over 3,000 extra voters since the last election. We now have 2 great Labour MPs and a Labour government because York Labour voters chose to turn out in greater numbers despite the challenges. I'm very grateful that York voters have placed their faith in our party to lead. I hope we prove them right to do so. But it shows that all parties have much to do beyond this motion, not just to make our democracy more accessible, but also to inspire people to turn up and vote. And that's something that everyone in this room can also play our part in.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Hollier.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I didn't realise I got to speak again. I think I'll just thank everybody for their contributions and displaying the usual level of wit, thoughtfulness and grace with which each is usually associated. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to the Labour Group for supporting the amendment. It's a rare opportunity for cross-party consensus. I think the motion is right to raise the issue of postal voters. We've spoken about the requirement for photo ID, and other colleagues have spoke eloquently about the impact, the real impact that's had. I think with postal voting, I think we need to look both at trying to influence government in terms of the increasingly tight timescales that local authorities are having to work within, given the postal system. I think as an authority, I think we can look at ourselves in terms of are we sufficiently resourcing the team in the council that is overseeing the elections. I know in the past it's something that Scrutiny has looked at, recognising that it's not for members to interfere in the organisation and operation of elections. But one thing we can look at and should do is to reflect the concerns that are expressed to us by residents, and I'm sure many of us who've been campaigning in the last few weeks. And we did have some successes, Councillor Kilbane. I've heard that story countless times. I think it's only appropriate that as members of this authority, we reflect those concerns in a constructive way, to work with officers and colleagues to identify ways in which we can improve as an authority to make sure as fewer people as possible are disenfranchised. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, do you wish to reply? Thank you. I will now take a vote on the motion as amended. If you wish to vote for the motion, please raise your hands now. Thank you. If you wish to vote against the motion, please raise your hands now. If you wish to abstain. Thank you. That's 35 votes for, 0 against and 3 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried. I now invite Councillor Nigel Eyre to move the fourth and final motion, which relates to fair funding for York.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As this motion points out, the Institute for Fiscal Studies released a shocking report into the disparity of funding for the same public services in different council areas. In my 17 years as a councillor, in York, debate has always been overshadowed by repeated national attacks on local authority finances, and in particular the poor deal residents of York receive from central government. As far back as 2009, yes, time goes back more than 14 years, the council executive agreed the blueprints for the More for York programme. A few of us from that executive are still around today. In fact, the author of that report is now our head of paid services. He noted then that in 2008-2009, York had the second lowest Band D equivalent council tax of all 46 unitary councils. It had the lowest spend per head and received the 7th lowest government grant per head. Therefore, York could be considered to be one of the lowest funded authorities in the country. 15 years later, the position is even more bleak. The IFS figures are staggering. Residents of York receiving only £3,642 compared to a national average of £4,310, with York ranked last in England, is not an acceptable situation. The picture is consistent across all public services. 147th in NHS funding, 148th in school funding, 143rd in local government funding, 49th in police funding, and 127th in public health funding. This represents a £668 per person shortfall in spending on just the national average, or a £135 million gap for the city as a whole. Nearly 3 years ago, whilst in administration, the York Liberal Democrats helped launch a new campaign known as F20, made up of some of the most underfunded councils in England. This was set up in the belief that short-term action was necessary, otherwise local authorities like York would be hit the hardest. This campaign to date has fallen on deaf ears. As recently as last year, the F20 responded to the government's funding settlement, concluding that the fair funding review appears to be off the table for several years and low-funded authorities need additional resources now. Pending the eventual outcome of the fair funding review, F20 strongly urged the government to act now in the 23-24 final settlement to address the low levels of funding the F20 group and other councils face by allocating around £300 million to the lowest funded authorities with no detriment to the higher funded authorities. Today, York Liberal Democrats are renewing their call for the government to urgently invest that extra £300 million to local authorities that struggle to provide essential and valued services to their local communities due to low core spending power. The long-standing lack of funding across all public services in York is an issue that successive governments have failed to address. The impact of these failures is felt in every area of life, be that health, education, police, or council services. As ward councillors, we are all constantly speaking to residents who can't book a GP appointment. For many years now, it's been impossible in this area, in fact in North Yorkshire as a whole, to get an NHS dentist. And each year, more people who actually had one find themselves being struck off. York's public services are at breaking point. As the leader's report earlier stated, this is an unprecedented opportunity for York to finally receive the support from central government our residents deserve. It's time for the government to listen to York and to listen to the cross-party group of the lowest funded councils across the country and deliver a fair funding solution that will close the gap between York and the rest of the country. Action was urgent in the last funding settlement, and it is even more so now. I call on all councillors to support this motion and work together with our MPs and Mayor to secure the much needed injection now to bring York to the same level as others. We are not asking for the earth, just for York's residents to receive the same support as everyone else.
Thank you. May I have a seconder?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to second this motion. It's no secret that York has long suffered from chronic underfunding by central government. It was clear when I was first elected in 2003, and it's got far worse since. Our city has been left behind, struggling to provide essential services to our residents due to this lack of support. We mustn't allow York to continue to suffer from inadequate funding any longer. During this Parliament, the government must act to close the funding gap between York and the national average. I want to talk about one aspect of this situation in which not only is York underfunded, but the rest of the UK is too, and that aspect is policing. In reply to a recent Liberal Democrat Freedom of Information request, it was revealed that last year in the city of York, 59% of burglaries went unsolved. Of 666 cases, 391 had their investigation completed, but no suspect was identified. Worse than this, nationally, official government figures show that nearly 76% of burglaries went unsolved in 2023. Too many families in York now feel unsafe in their own homes because frontline policing was decimated under the previous Conservative government. It reached the point where ministers simply couldn't get the basics right on solving crime, and this has resulted in a denial of justice to victims. That's why I'm proud that the Liberal Democrats committed to a burglary response guarantee at the general election, ensuring that all home burglaries are attended by the police and properly investigated. This would be an important step forward. Let us hope that the new Labour government will take note of this and instigate action to give York its fair share of police funding, as well as a fair share of funding for other public services. This motion is vital, and we're all aware of the constraints on local government funding. No administration, though, would want to make the type of cuts that have happened: cutting library provision, cutting the Salvation Army contract, creating a deeply unpopular green bin tax. All of these could have been avoided in York with a fair funding settlement. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I now invite debate on the motion. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I thank Councillor Healy for noting in his speech to our motion earlier that this motion is very similar. And I look forward to some genuine cross-party working with the Liberal Democrat group on this. As I always do every time I have the opportunity to speak about council finances, the door is always open to anyone who wants to drop by for a chat about how we can work together on that. It is, however, quite difficult to speak on a motion that's so similar to our own. I won't repeat the points I made earlier because I'm certain that everyone was listening to them. And it's great that the Liberal Democrat group recognised the impact of other public service funding cuts on the council and what our council is able to deliver. I will, however, just correct something that Councillor Healy said in his speech on our earlier motion when he talked about the final funding settlement for the current financial year being made after we had set our budget, and that's obviously not the case. The funding settlement came through in December. Additional emergency funding was, of course, announced just in the week before we set our budget, and 1.5 million did not go into a rainy day fund. It was allocated to the council specifically to address the cost pressures and the additional service pressures in adult and children's services, and it was used exactly for that purpose. And it's really important that we don't let misinformation about how the council spends its money go unchallenged. So wherever the council is allocated funding for a specific purpose, that is the purpose we use it for, because we abide by financial rules. I'm really gratified to hear the Lib Dem group are so keen to work with us on our efforts to secure better funding for this council. And it's interesting to hear Councillor Eyre talk about the efforts that he's made during his 17 years on the council. And it's a shame that those haven't borne any fruit yet, but we are hopeful that working together we can make a difference. And Councillor Cuthbertson notes that we have had to make unpalatable decisions about cuts to services, and we will make those unpalatable decisions because that is what we were elected by the city to do, and we will not meet ongoing cost pressures with one-off spends because we will set a budget that is financially sensible and prudent.
Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And obviously this is very similar in spirit as a motion to the one put forward by Councillor Burton. So I would echo many of the points that I made in seconding that motion. The state opening of Parliament took place earlier today after a general election that was less than 2 weeks ago. The country is now working on some big missions for change. And as this motion helpfully points out, we now have 2 Labour MPs representing us here in York, who can work together as an even stronger voice with our Labour Council leader, our Labour Mayor for York and North Yorkshire to secure the benefits of a Labour government for our residents. However, in his remarks, Councillor Eyre accurately stated that successive governments failed to provide sufficient resources and funds for public services. I think he meant recent governments failed to deliver public services and resources for public services, because the last Labour government delivered enormous investment in public services and huge change for residents across York. GP appointments within 48 hours, cancer treatments from referral from a GP within 2 weeks, record investment in schools and transformational efforts to address child poverty. So assuming that that is an oversight, and I think that this motion does set out what I hope is a clear and constructive commitment to work with and not against a new Labour government. On that basis, and what I hope is a spirit of constructive collaboration, I would urge Council to support this motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We will be supporting this motion with a similar lack of enthusiasm to the earlier motion. Ultimately, the motion will achieve absolutely nothing. We're going to write some letters and we're going to go home very happy when we'll have made absolutely no difference whatsoever. It is, as has been said, an incredibly similar motion to the Labour motion, because basically there is no fundamental difference between the Labour and Liberal Democrat group on City of York Council, apart from disagreeing for disagreement's sake. There's parts of this motion which are nothing whatsoever to do with the council, and we've heard from Councillor Coles, for example, about the impacts of GPs, cancer, funding schools, but again, nothing to do with the council at all. But I did just want to correct Councillor Cuthbertson in his comments. He's very concerned about police funding, and he specifically said about the extent of cuts to police funding under the Conservative government. And I would just point out to Councillor Cuthbertson, the pace of cuts to police funding were greater under the Lib Dem involvement in government than they were the rest of the government. If you take the whole term, if you take the average, the cuts in the number of police officers were greater when the Lib Dems were in government than if you take the Conservative government on the whole or in a particular term. The cuts to the number of PCSO officers were greater when the Liberal Democrats were in government than if you take the Conservatives on their own on average or any other term. So it is just utterly ridiculous, as the Lib Dems do, to sit there saying bad Conservatives this, bad Conservatives that. But if you want more funding for the police, we've seen that in the last few years. We've seen big increase in the number of officers, big increase in the money going into all sorts of areas in the police. History states, as a point of fact, The time when police funding was cut the greatest was when the Lib Dems were in government, and that's a simple fact.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And it's a long time since I've watched rats fighting in a bag, but it's very, very nice to watch. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I just needed to address the concerns raised by the Conservative group. These motions have been on notice for quite a long time now, and if the Conservative group really thought that the whole of tonight was going to be a waste of their time, they've had ample opportunity to put amendments in to make these motions fit for what they see are the needs of the people of York. They failed to do so. I mean, I don't know if that's due to lack of capacity in such a small group or just not getting around to it. I don't know, but you can't sit there and whinge about your time being wasted when you've had ample opportunity to make full use of your time tonight by bringing forward amendments, which you've clearly failed to do. And just in terms of Councillor Stewart's reluctance to write letters, about as reluctant as he is to write amendments. I think, you know, it might have been a waste of time. Well, it was a waste of time to write to the Conservative government because they weren't listening. Now we have a government that's listening, that wants to try and solve the problems, and hopefully the efforts of this council will fall on ears that are open to listening, and we might see some change.
Thank you. Councillor Red, do you wish to reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think on the issue of similarity, I would agree, and it is unfortunate. We did have quite a different motion about wildflower meadows that was ruled out of order, and we can have a lengthy conversation about why that particular happened. That would have led to some different change and an extra debate, but unfortunately, we weren't able to do that one. I wasn't sure what to say in response. I'm grateful to Councillor Coles for saying that you would support the motion, because I was sat in between thinking, well, Councillor Lomas hasn't said anything, so I don't want to upset anybody. Obviously, Councillor Stewart will oppose it, but we will see that one. On some of the specific points, Councillor Coles, now I wasn't mistaken. If you read my speech, I went back to 2009. I believe that was the Labour administration. That was when the More for York programme was introduced. If you look at those exec papers, I think it was August 2009, £15 million had been identified in necessary efficiencies to this council as a result of the lack of funding from the Labour government at that time. That was increased, I believe, to around about 20 million after the paper by officers had been written due to the financial situation that was in. That's when that period started. So I'm not going to do what Councillor Stewart does and draw that period or that period. I'm going back to 2009, successive governments, the Labour government, the coalition government, the Conservative government, that pattern of cutting funding to local authority. Because let's be fair, it's easy. Pain doesn't fall on the government when it's done to local authorities. The local authorities feel the pain. So that's been going on for a considerable amount of time. And it's not helpful for all of us to sit around here and single out individual particular governments. In response to Councillor Lomas, I would recommend that you read the outturn report in tomorrow's executive, because you are using a ridiculous amount of one-off funding to balance the budget in 23-24. In fact, £614,000 of the public health reserve, which we were told should not have been touched, is being used just in last year to balance the budget, on top of the already earmarked reserves and reserves within things. So there has been no change in your policy in terms of not using one-off funding. Huge amounts of one-off funding being used to balance that, and I suspect that will happen going forward. So with that, I urge everybody to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. I will now take a vote on the motion. If you wish to vote for the motion, please raise your hands. Thank you. That was unanimous. Therefore, the motion is passed. That concludes the section on motions. I will now invite members to question the leader and executive members in respect of any matter within their portfolio responsibility in accordance with Council Procedure Rule B11. Please, can you address the Lord Mayor with your question, speaking clearly and indicating to which executive member your question is directed. There is a maximum of 15 minutes in total for questions in this session. If any of the questions which have been put cannot be answered at the meeting, a written reply will be circulated to members within 5 working days following the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Nichols.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. My questions to the Executive Member for Transport. As the Executive Member will be aware, there's been a weight limit on Appleton Road Bridge in Bishopthorpe since October, and hopefully will be fixed by the end of the year. When the bridge is open or closed, the location of Selcon in particular, and a number of haulage companies in Acaster area, means an ever increasing number of lorries going through Bishopthorpe, Copmanthorpe and Appleton Roadbook. And they're a real threat to road safety. To the youngest and the oldest, I have seen the lorries when I was there in the past, taking my daughter to school, and also to pedestrians and cyclists. Does the Executive Member agree with me that is entirely unacceptable situation and that such companies should be located in the sides of motorways or main A64 types and where land is cheap? If she does agree, will she join myself and my colleague, Councillor Stewart, in working towards stopping such companies operating where always driving through villages is unavoidable? And what action would you like to see the council taking? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I think this is a case of a company that's outgrown its location. It's become very successful, and it's obviously, when we're looking at our transport strategy and the movement and place plan, we're really focusing on what kind of places do we want to create and what sort of traffic and what environment are we trying to create. And the villages you mentioned, Bishopthorpe, Appleton Roebuck, Copmanthorpe, all of that area where these HGVs are going through those villages, yes, having such huge HGVs going through the villages is not appropriate. And we need to look at ways in which we can discourage that kind of traffic through those small villages. Right now, our options for addressing this, well, first of all, we're looking at fixing the bridge in Bishopthorpe is in progress. So that will help to relieve some of the pressure because we won't have all the HGVs going along the same road. Secondly, once that's fixed, we need to start looking at measures that we can introduce in the villages to make them feel safer places for people to walk, to cycle, to get to school safely, to get to the doctors safely. So I would be very happy to come to visit you in your villages, to look with officers at what measures we can introduce in the short term to improve the feel of those villages as part of our movement and place plan, to make them a safe environment for people. We're very much committed to our Vision Zero policy, where we eliminate road deaths and serious injuries by 2040. So making sure that heavy vehicles like HGVs are travelling slowly enough and ideally not going through small villages is something we will be looking to do. But it's not something we can do overnight, so we'll have to work progressively on the kind of measures that we can use in the coming years. So thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Hollier.
A question for the leader, and just in terms of the motion just passed, particularly in terms of postal votes. Obviously in York there are issues with the timely dispatch of postal ballots and incorrect polling cards being issued to residents who'd moved into a new constituency. And obviously this led to residents having to come into West offices to collect their postal ballots. Some residents, as we've been hearing, being disenfranchised altogether. I'm just wondering if the leader could please say what discussions you've had with officers to date, just to understand what these issues and and how they arose, and what resources will be put in place to avoid a repeat in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Hollier. Yeah, I think there's no way that we can understate the challenges that both officers and residents felt over the general election period concerning receipt of the postal votes in the first place, and then when they needed or they didn't arrive to come into West offices and actually get them reissued. And so that's why we actually put together the motion that we've seen today, so that we can look at that process but there's no getting away either from the fact that the administration burden on staff around registration of postal voters, and then, you know, any reissue is a problem. So I think that the team actually responded really well. There were long waits at certain points. I think on the Friday of the week, as we headed into the 4th of July, that was particularly bad. But Lindsay and her team responded to that, and then by the Monday, the wait times are much reduced. So the conversations over that period were ongoing. I think the team coped remarkably well given the situation. They were as distressed about the wait of the residents as many of the residents were. So this is a bigger system issue. It's not just about what we deliver locally. So I think we need to get on and work together to try and make sure that that voting system works for people nationally. And hopefully we will benefit locally from that as well.
Is that a supplementary, Councillor Cole? Was that? No. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a question for the Executive Member for Environment, Councillor Kent. It relates to the work of volunteers in the city. One issue that I've raised and residents have raised with me is whether volunteers who help manage council land, whether that's weeding curbsides or gathering fallen leaves, will be charged by the council for disposing of the green waste that they collect on the council's behalf. And my understanding is that they will be charged in the same way that everybody else will who wishes to sign up to that service. I was wondering whether you share my concern about the message that could be perceived as sending out to volunteers in the city about how we appreciate their work, if we don't seem willing to recognise that work through the system that's being implemented at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fenton. And you'll know from my report that I do value very highly the work that all our volunteers across the city do. This might be better for me to follow up afterwards with you about the particular volunteers and where they're doing the work. But the short answer is that if it's true voluntary work, then there are arrangements via the eco team for them to put the weeds or the leaves that they're picking up into green bags and have it collected by the public realm. If they're currently putting it into green bins, which are residential, and they'll need to switch, then I can help you put them in touch with the right people to do that. I could go into more detail. There are some issues to check whether they're actually collecting stuff on council land or their own private land. But if it's genuine volunteer work, there's a system in place, and the eco team are the ones to talk to about that. But I can get in touch with you afterwards.
Okay.
It's not just volunteers who work for organisations who volunteer, as Councillor Fenton has said. There are many residents across the city who look after their areas in front of their houses as a part of civic pride to keep their neighbourhood looking in good condition. They're now going to be charged for the privilege of helping the council to do that. If they didn't do it, the council would have to spend more money maintaining those areas that residents are currently doing.
Thank you. Do you mean, for example, people cutting verges in front of their own homes? Is that the kind of thing you're suggesting? I'm not sure.
Indeed, yes.
Oh, sorry, I've lost my microphone. So obviously people are free to cut the verge in front of their home, but and that's a preference issue. You might prefer that the council cut it more often than it does or is able to, and we've all talked all evening about the difficult financial circumstances that local authorities find themselves in, but we've made a commitment to cut them 6 times a year this year. But they are public realm, and that's the level of standard that we can afford to keep at this stage. That's under review and we're checking on it. If people have a desire to cut the verge more than that, then that is a preference and that's a matter of choice. And I would say it's hard to balance because I also have an inbox full of people who are irate when the council cuts the bit of verge in front of their house because they were valuing the short flowering plants that are there. So that's a choice, I would say. I do value volunteer work. We all really appreciate the civic pride that the residents of York show in the city and all the work that goes into that. But it's a sort of castle walls approach, isn't it? Some people love very short grass. Some people would like it much longer. And that's their choice. If they want to take that additional work on, as parish councils do, that's great if that's what they all agree they want to do. If it's truly volunteering work, there is a system to help them remove the green waste.
Thank you. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. It's a question to the executive member for education, children, young people. The Council's Public Health Team commissioned the Healthy Schools programme from Healthy Schools North Yorkshire from March 2023 up until March 2025. Could the executive member outline the benefits to schools and young people in York from that?
Thank you, Councillor Burton. And yeah, this chamber is not great for speaking because I have to say, when I can't see someone's face, I really do struggle to hear them speak. So I've got probably the opposite problem to Councillor Runciman. On healthy schools, so we've introduced this award alongside North Yorkshire. And I just want to take the moment to say Huntington School first achieved a bronze award and now have subsequently achieved a silver award. I went along to the school to meet some of the young people who were outlining what they'd achieved, and they were particularly glad to be out of maths, I believe, but they spoke to me anyway. As part of the award, the thing that really I think is really positive is not just about physical health, it is about mental health as well. And Huntington School, for example, introduced mental health champions and a mental health policy. In order to get the silver or gold level awards, you have to show staff well-being is part of that as well. And I think that that is something very dear to my heart. And finally, I think that the really key points around this are it is supporting active lives. So, of course, we are talking physical health, emotional health and well-being. My favourite topic, of course, food in schools. That is so important. And then PSHCE. Sorry, it's changed now, PSHE. And that is personal, social, health and economic education. So all of those things combined, what we're doing is we're just starting to encourage schools to do what they can to support their young people and their staff to be healthy in all aspects of their life. And I'm really glad that we've got a quarter of the York schools already started on this programme. I'd love to see more, and we're hoping that'll grow over time. But thank you for the question.
We have 2 minutes left in this section. Councillor Vassie, is it a quick question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A question to Councillor Kent. Oh, it's not working. Got another one. Okay. Your report refers to the steps being taken to improve biodiversity, for example, through changes in mowing regimes to support wildflowers. As you know, councillors of all parties and none are reporting that wildflowers continue to be destroyed this year in wards across the city, including on areas of land and verges for wildflowers in Weldrake and Westfield and elsewhere. Given that officers ruled out of order a Lib Dem motion aimed at enabling councillors of all parties to repeat our joint commitment for action on biodiversity, how do you see elected members helping you to ensure that officers listen to the political will of York and deliver the protection and enhancement of biodiversity that we all wish to see? And secondly, very quickly, your report refers to the investment that Innovate UK is making in York. Are you aware that Innovate UK helps local authorities extend EV vehicle charging to terrace properties? Will the administration seek to ensure that York's 15,000 homes in terrace streets can take advantage of Innovate UK funding and participate in the switch to electric vehicles? Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Bassey. I'm afraid I didn't quite hear the section, or maybe it was predating my time as a councillor as to what happened in the past, which the council overruled. But I think the gist of your question was how can we all ensure that biodiversity is protected and that officers enact that desire? So I mentioned briefly the mapping that's been going on over the last 12 months. I think everybody here knows that there wasn't a very good system, or there was no system of mapping properly what should be cut and what shouldn't. And it is difficult. I'm not underestimating it, that where we have this patchwork, it is slightly castle walls approach. Yes, no, maybe so. That's hard for operatives who are just sitting cutting to know about. So if there are areas that have been cut and shouldn't, or vice versa, please get in touch with me and Head of Operations Ben Grabham jointly, and so we can enable that mapping to be done, because it takes all of us. We all know, you know your local areas better than anybody. So that's one thing. Keep informing us so that mapping becomes complete. Report immediately if it's gone wrong. Take it up. I don't think there's a desire by officers genuinely to destroy biodiversity. I think they understand the importance of it. I think it's an operational management problem. You'll know that we deeply regret what happened in Weldrake. I hope that the conclusions we've reached about that in terms of taking the management off the landowner in question will help. And I look forward to the next year's crop there. And there are further steps that we're taking in terms of biodiversity. I mentioned the local mapping that we're doing.
Thank you, councillor Ken.
Sorry, so Innovate UK. If you ask me again in the next session, I can answer that.
I was going to say, it does move us quite nicely onto the item 10, which is the written report by councillor Kent, the executive member for Environment and Climate Emergency, and that's been set out in the papers. So I do now invite members to question councillor Kent on her written report. May I remind members that standing orders allow 10 minutes for questions to the executive member. If any of the questions which have been put cannot be answered within the time limit, a written reply will be circulated to members within 5 working days. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It was a question about solar for schools and the partnership, and to ask councillor Kent where it was already operating and what the plans are to roll it out to other schools. And if you could make any particular reference to the Westfield ward, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Coles. So solar for schools, that's very timely. I was at Dringhouses this morning, Dringhouses Primary School, where they've just had their 74 panels put on the rooftops. I met the 4 eco warriors, primary from kindergarten or reception right up to year 6, who were fantastically keen and passionate about the project. And the whole team there at the school was delighted. And that's one of the latest out of 7 schools across York that now benefit from the Solar for Schools projects. For those that don't know, this is a fantastic collaboration between Solar for Schools, the partnership, and local authorities and educational establishments. And they come, they assess your school to see if it's suitable. They do all the planning, they do the installation, and there's a payback scheme whereby they take off the energy, but you get a reduced energy price. So it's a win-win. And in addition to that, there's an educational component. So they come and deliver STEM type subjects around sustainability and renewables and cheaper electricity, and involve the children in that. And there's a section in Dringhouses in their curriculum, which they're already planning to have that done in. So that was fantastic. In relation to Westfield, you'll be delighted to know that we have 2 more projects in the pipeline, the first of which is Westfield, and the next is Applefields. I hope that will be installed by the end of this year, which will bring the total to 9. And it's, as I've said, it's a win for the planet because it reduces emissions. It's a win for the schools because it gives them extra educational training and cheap renewable energy. It's a win for the council because it reduces our costs. So it's a really wonderful project. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to ask about the role that Councillor Kent is playing in the development of retrofitting council homes and making sure that our housing stock is as environmentally friendly as possible, particularly with relation to new development, but also existing housing stock as well.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. So yes, so if I could just start by saying that this is overlaps with Councillor Pavlovic's portfolio, but I know, again, a huge amount of work has been done by that team to map all the energy performance certificates across the city. So we have a really good idea of what every individual house, how its energy is used and how good it is. And the good news for our council tenants, our social housing, is that generally we perform much higher than the private residential stock. And in relation to that, our retrofit policy is that we go in and under our repair schemes, we do voids first. So there's no fuss to tenants. Much of the resistance in terms of the retrofit that has to happen is from the tenants or residents themselves, because your house is it's turned upside down. Insulation is quite intrusive. If you're fitting heat pumps or new cookers which are not gas, then that is, that takes time out of your life and messes up your home, and there is resistance. So we do it when there's nobody in there. We've shortened the times between the voids, and we've done the repairs and prevention against mold and made them cozier, warmer, cheaper houses to live in. And that's been fantastic. This is a good time to ask that question, because we've also recently, in terms of social housing, York came first in one award, the Major Project Award, and second in local authority, who's done outstanding work in this area under the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund projects, and that was in the Yorkshire Energy Awards. And particularly fantastic about that is that it's not just did you deliver energy efficiency measures, but it's did you do it with customer satisfaction, with craftsmanship, with skill, and they did really well on that. In relation to the city as a whole, we've been running various schemes which are funded, largely government funded, but different pockets of funding. But we've rolled this out really well, and I think we're seen as a very good place to pilot schemes and to roll schemes out in because of the way we do it. And so the lead project has been for hard to reach areas, conservation areas, gypsy and traveller amenity areas. We go out and I've met two of the people going out. They've visited at least 35 private homes currently. We've got another 12 months to run on this. They give a whole advice pack, tell you how to do it, and also give support and trusted suppliers. And Hug 2, which is going to places which are hard to reach and also off gas, so completely low performance energy and not even on the system. In terms of new build, we have a commitment to 100% affordable housing, which we are sticking to resolutely. And I'm also delighted to announce that we are also sticking to, where we can, passive house standards. And that's going to be rolled out wherever possible. So not only will they be cheaper to buy, affordable for the people who need them in our city, they'll be cheaper to live in and cheaper to run.
Councillor Healy.
Very much, Lord Mayor. You mentioned retrofitting heat pumps onto existing council properties. I wasn't aware that we were doing so, so I'd be really interested in you just expanding on that succinctly, because I understand there's other questions to be asked.
Yes, so that's where in certain properties where we can, we haven't done it as a matter of course because it doesn't suit all of them, and there's some debate over efficiency levels of insulation first. That was our priority. I can give you details of where that's happened after. I don't have that to hand. I'll do that if I contact you afterwards, or do it within the 5 days.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Kent, your report states that you're looking at relocating the Hazel Court household waste recycling depot. Can you please confirm which alternative locations are being considered, and also whether you are considering the future of the Towthorpe household waste disposal site?
Thank you, Councillor Fenton. So that's part of a project which is a mayoral combined authority funded project. So it's looking at the business case primarily for a green energy park at Harewood Wynn, which is where our recycling currently goes. And the outline position of that is that that's already under progress. That business case would be the potential to provide 10,000 homes with renewable electricity from either solar or possibly onshore wind, but primarily solar at this stage. But this business case is also exploring the potential for hydrogen, for battery storage, and for EV charging. As a sideline to that, because Hazel Court is approaching capacity and there are issues with its location in the city centre, they're exploring the business case for relocating Hazel Court to Harewood Wynn, which might make sense in terms of there'll be an uptake from cheap renewable energy there. But we're only looking at the business case for that. That's part of the project. It's not a conclusion. If it happened, it wouldn't be for many, years. We're not talking months. So this isn't that we're looking at it as we're definitely doing this as a project. It's part of the mayoral combined funding to see, would this be the best use of or part of the use of a new green energy park? But it might be, if hydrogen comes out, I think it's unlikely at this stage, but I don't know. If hydrogen comes out as the most appropriate use of it, then that might mean that that actually using it as a waste depot is not the most efficient way.
So quick supplementary, if I may. Just as the second part of the question was about Towthorpe. Is that part of the, is that in the mix in terms of the business case that's being looked at, please?
So I don't know. I think it was Hazel Court primarily, and Towthorpe would remain. But obviously, if there are benefits at some point to doing anything there, we would look at it. But that's not part of this project, and there's nothing in plan for that.
Supplementary.
Is that supplementary?
It's just a point of clarification, 'cause I'm not sure if I understood you fully. So one of the mitigations for the green waste changes is that residents can take their green waste to Hazel Court, but you seem to have just said that Hazel Court will be closing and moving to Harewood Wyn. So the suggestion is that green waste is taken to Harewood Wyn.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. I apologise if I didn't make myself clear. I said that what we have is a business plan being looked at as to whether it would make sense for Hazel Court to be relocated as part of the Green Energy Park. I also said if this happened, it wouldn't be for a number of years, probably the end of this decade, if that did happen. Meanwhile, of course, you're free to take your green waste there. And if that did happen, if it would make sense both in carbon and in energy efficiency and in costs, to relocate our waste depot, of course, we'd also be looking at what happens to green waste for people who live in the city meanwhile. This is primarily about large vehicles travelling in and out of the city carrying waste, which many people would say is not ideal, but nothing's going to happen in the next few years.
Councillor Crawshaw, we have less than a minute, so your answer may have to be written.
If you want to draw a line there, that's okay, or I can very quickly ask my supplementary. All right, just very quickly, you mentioned that the Harewood Wyn project was part of a discussions that are ongoing with the combined authority and looking at the environmental benefits that there might be for the city. And I just wondered if you could very briefly, in less than a minute, outline any of the other discussions that you might be having with the combined authority about potential environmental benefits for the city.
Yes, so this is funding we've already got. It was about 3 million from the MCA as part of this net zero project. In addition to that, we've just had all the LED lighting in West offices, the second and third floors replaced through funding from the MCA, and 900 street lights. There's a possibility, because of an underspend by North York's a part of that we might get an additional 1,000 LED street lights across the city, and possibly other council buildings as well. But we're joining with them on all sorts of projects. And also, of course, there's 10 million in the climate fund for the mayoral climate fund, which we are putting pipeline projects towards. So all in all, the new combined mayoral authority is a really fantastic collaboration for us, an opportunity for us to decarbonise the whole region, and we'll get to net zero and all the benefits that entails for our air, our costs, our people, our homes. It's fantastic.
Thank you. We now move on to item 11. I now invite Councillor Fenton, the Chair of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee, to move receipt of his report set out in the council papers.
Formally moved, Lord Mayor.
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to debate the report, or is council happy to agree? Thank you. We will now move on to the next item. I now invite Councillor Douglas to move the recommendations in the report at agenda item 12 of the council agenda relating to parental leave policy for elected members.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally moved.
May I have a seconder, please?
Formally second.
Thank you. I now invite debate on the motion. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Happy to support the paper that's been brought forward and the recommendations. We did raise some questions with the Most Officer and HR around discrepancies between the policy that's put forward, the model policy as it applies to members, and discrepancies about how that treats members of staff. So we weren't able to sort that out before this meeting, unfortunately. So we'd ask people to go away and look at that and make sure that we're treating staff and members equally.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just briefly, I wanted to say something on behalf of parents, past, present and future, in favour of this policy. Councillors are in a different position to staff because we aren't employees, and as such, haven't been covered by any council policies when it comes to any parental leave. So I think this policy is extremely welcome, and I wanted to thank councillor colleagues and officers who've worked to make it happen. It brings the position for councillors in line with the Equality Act legislation of 2010, which ensured that pregnancy and maternity became protected characteristics. Just for context, around the exact time that the Equality Act came into force in 2010, I was pregnant, working in the voluntary sector for a youth charity. Austerity was just beginning. I got one of the first doses of austerity and was made redundant when I was 7 months pregnant. Employment protection and rights for parents really matter. And it matters because it's not been right that too many people have been deciding whether or not to put themselves forward for elected office based on whether or not they may or may not need to take any time off at some point. And we all know from all parties how important it is to do as much as we all can to encourage more people to put themselves forward for election. And this also matters because parents need some time to come to terms with the little bundles of chaos that have arrived into their lives. It matters because women's bodies need time to rest and recover after they've made a person and brought him or her into the world. And it matters because we want our children to have the best start in life, and that is easiest when parents feel like society values the job that they have to do as parents. I'm very proud to support this policy. I think it matters to me that we get this right for parents to come. It's long overdue and we have the chance to vote for it tonight, and I think we should.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm also delighted to support this policy being brought forward. I know that there are questions about the somehow a perception that the leave amounts are more generous than for staff, but it's not for us to comment on staff terms and conditions, which are of course a matter between the trade unions and the National Joint Council for negotiations. What we can say is that it absolutely is the case that some people have to make a choice about whether they stand for council or whether they restand for council, depending on whether they want to have a family and whether they think that they will be supported in that. And there's I think, an overused phrase about parenthood, which says that it takes a village to raise a child. I'm not sure I quite agree with that sentiment in its entirety, but I do think it's important that we see ourselves as part of the village that is required to raise children in this city, and that includes children who might be born to people who are on the council now, might be thinking about coming on the council in future. And it's high time that we regularised arrangements for parents who need to take some leave when they are doing such an important job of bringing children into our city, which is absolutely what we need. And I'm particularly proud that this motion also looks at leave for adoptive parents, which is also vitally important to the working of this council.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very pleased that this long overdue policy will hopefully be adopted at the meeting tonight, and it's another demonstration of our administration's commitment to equalities and human rights. There are many barriers in place when it comes to serving as a councillor, and I hope that this will be another step towards working to improve the diversity of the council, as I think that we should have a council that's reflective of our city. The original wording of the motion created disappointing but unsurprising comments about the gendered language. But I'm pleased that we've corrected the language to be gender neutral and want to re-emphasise our commitment to standing with the trans community in York and beyond. It's hoped that steps like these will allow councillors some security and stability and will go some way in addressing archaic views on taking paternal leave, as it is, of course, a protected characteristic. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge, I think that, you know, we do sometimes indulge in a little bit of robust knockabout in this space, and it's been seen in other domains online, in leaflets, what have you. I think it's really, really, really important to acknowledge that there is already enough pressure on parents, particularly parents of very young children. And I would hope that when we do start to see people on maternity and paternity leave, that is respected for what it is, because I think it's really important that we don't add any additional pressure to young families. And I think I'll just slightly extend that point into thinking about all of us here who have children or other caring commitments. Sometimes this chamber and the way that we do council business is not as family friendly as it might be. It's nearly 10 o'clock at night. I'm missing my son's bedtime. I know there are other people who are similarly missing part of their usual family routine. And I would like to think this might be a first step in trying to make the council as family friendly and as inclusive as it can be, so that we do get that wide range of different people feeling able to participate and have their voices heard, not just a particular group of people who can make that commitment.
Thank you. Councillor Vassey.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I support entirely all the comments that have been made up to now. As someone who has 3 children, I recognise the strains and oh, pardon me, I've gone off again. As a parent who's with 3 children, I recognise everything that's been said here, and I strongly support what's been proposed. There is one thing here that isn't being said, though, that does concern me a little. Has consideration been given as to how we ensure that local residents continue to have access to representation while councillors are on leave? And I ask that particularly to remember in a single person ward. I can see that in a 3-person ward, there are other people to take the flak. I just hope that you'll be able to assure me, and maybe there's best practice in other local authorities to guide us on this, to ensure that local residents still have access to the help that we as elected members can give while parents are taking their leave.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, do you wish to reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to thank everybody for their comments, and we know that it's hugely important, that parents feel valued at this point in time, and also it gives opportunity for people in the future to consider becoming a councillor, and doesn't stop anybody from participating in this role. And thank you for that comment, Councillor Vassey. We've certainly considered multi-member wards, and as you say, that is quite or relatively straightforward. A single member ward, I think we need to consider how that might work. But yeah, thank you for that comment, and we will take that one up. So I'd like to suggest we move to the vote then, if we can.
Thank you. I will now take a vote on the motion. If you wish to vote for the motion, please raise your hands. Thank you. That was unanimous. We now move on to item 13. All right. I now invite Councillor Runciman, on behalf of the Chair of the Joint Standards Committee, Councillor Rowley, to move the annual report at agenda item 13 of the Council agenda.
Move, Lord Mayor, and reserve the right. Thank you.
May I have a seconder?
Formally second, Lord Mayor.
Does anyone wish to debate the motion, or is council happy to note the report? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 14. I now invite Councillor Douglas to move the recommendations in the report at agenda item 14 of the council agenda relating to the use of general exception, urgency and special urgency procedures.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And just for everybody's information in the chamber, this report will become a regular feature of our agendas over a period of time. We should have been receiving a report along these lines where the general exception, so urgency and special urgency procedures have been used. And this is the first time that it has been reported to council, I believe, in a very long time. I've not seen it in my period, and just thinking whether Councillor Merritt has in the past. No. So we are now, thanks to Lindsay, our Deputy Monitoring Officer, back on the straight and narrow with this. So yeah, I suggest that we move this to the vote. Thank you.
May I have a second?
Yeah, formally second, but I think it's for noting, Lord Mayor.
Does anyone wish to debate the motion, or is council happy to agree the recommendations? Thank you. I have no further urgent business, so that concludes the meeting this evening. Thank you very much.